Beneath the restless waves of the Indian Ocean lies a silence older than memory. There are places where the sea floor drops like a broken stairway into darkness, where ridges and plateaus suggest continents that once breathed under the sun. Long before the word Lemuria was spoken by Victorian scientists, fragments of myth and echoing traditions hinted at a drowned land bridging Madagascar, India, and far-flung islands now scattered like ruins of a shattered crown. Some claimed it was the cradle of civilizations erased by rising seas. Others saw in it the outline of human origins deliberately forgotten. Even today, the ocean hides clues that seem too deliberate to dismiss, yet too elusive to grasp. Geological scars, scattered fossils, and cultural traces on distant shores whisper of a land mass lost, its people erased not by time alone, but by the silence of history itself. Was it tectonic fate, a natural burial under waves, or has some hand in power chosen to obscure its memory? This is not just the story of a sunken continent. It is the story of how absence itself becomes evidence, how the void beneath the ocean becomes a question mark etched into human consciousness. Welcome to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. The first stirrings of Lemuria began not in ancient myth, but in the minds of 19th century scholars, when science itself was still carving pathways through the mist of speculation. It was in 1864 that the zoologist Philip Lutley Sclater, studying the distribution of lemurs, noticed a striking puzzle. The creatures thrived in Madagascar and India, yet curiously absent in Africa and the Middle East, where one might have expected their range to extend. The question troubled him, for the continents seemed far apart, and the creatures too delicate to have crossed vast oceans unaided. To explain this anomaly, Sclater suggested that a landmass must once have existed between Madagascar and India, a bridge now swallowed by the sea. He gave it a name drawn from the small primates that inspired the theory, Lemuria. For many, this was not merely zoology, but the whisper of a continent erased. It was an idea born in the age of Darwin, when naturalists were mapping life's patterns across the globe, yet it carried with it the resonance of myth, of places forgotten and submerged. Even before Sclater, echoes of such vanished lands existed in cultural memory. In the Tamil traditions of South India, poets spoke of Kumari Kandam, a vast territory south of the Indian peninsula where dynasties rose and perished, and where floods erased cities until only fragments of poetry survived. To colonial ears, Kumari Kandam sounded suspiciously like an ancient memory of Sclater's Lemuria, a cultural shard aligned with geological conjecture. Was it coincidence? Or did folklore preserve what science was only beginning to guess? The lines blurred between observation and imagination, between the fossils in the rocks and the verses in the mouths of storytellers. Geology added its voice in fragments, for in the Indian Ocean, plateaus and ridges lie beneath the waters, as though mountain ranges drowned in silence. The Mascarene Plateau, stretching from the Seychelles toward Mauritius, suggested to some early researchers the ghostly spine of a continent. Later studies revealed microcontinents, submerged fragments of ancient crust, such as the area now called Mauritia, buried under volcanic flows, but once part of a landmass long before humans ever walked the earth. These discoveries did not prove Lemuria as Sclater imagined it, yet they reminded us that the ocean floor hides histories stranger than speculation. If pieces of continents could indeed vanish beneath water, why could not whole empires of memory vanish with them? The story of Lemuria soon escaped the bounds of zoology. Helena Blavatsky, the mystic founder of the Theosophical Society, took the idea and infused it with esoteric power. To her, Lemuria was not just a sunken land, but the cradle of humanity's earlier root races, beings whose wisdom surpassed what later ages could comprehend. She placed them in a cycle of rise and fall, where spiritual corruption invited cataclysm, and waters closed over their achievements like a judgment. Though historians dismissed her claims, they spread widely, intertwining scientific speculation with spiritual longing. Lemuria ceased to be merely a zoologist's hypothesis. It became an emblem of hidden origins, a continent of forgotten truths lying beneath both water and consciousness. Yet even without esoteric color, the notion of a drowned land in the Indian Ocean provokes unease. What else might lie beneath those depths? In 2001, sonar mapping and drilling projects began to reveal that the Indian Ocean is scarred with fragments of Gondwana, the ancient supercontinent that split apart nearly 180 million years ago. Madagascar itself is such a fragment, and smaller shards, like the Kerguelen Plateau, bear the marks of having once risen above water. Scientific consensus insists these vanished lands are far older than humans, yet the visual of submerged ridges and plateaus feeds the imagination. To look at them is to wonder whether legends like Kumari Kandam were metaphors born of ancestral memory, a way of encoding the trauma of rising seas at the end of the last ice age, when shorelines retreated and swallowed villages whole. Human memory is fragile, but collective trauma often leaves marks that endure. Around 12,000 years ago, the ocean surged with the melting of glaciers, raising sea levels by more than 100 meters. Archaeologists have noted submerged structures off the coasts of India, in the Gulf of Cambay, and near southern Japan. Evidence hotly debated but impossible to ignore. Could these be echoes of real settlements overwhelmed by water, remembered later in myth as the lands of Lemuria or Kumari Kandam? Science, careful in its claims, draws a line between geological timescales and human civilization. Yet myth resists those boundaries, blending memory with imagination. Perhaps what survives in poetry and speculation is not exact history, but the shadow of an event too immense to be forgotten. Still, one must ask, why did the name Lemuria, coined in a scholarly journal, spread with such fervor? Was it because the human mind longs for lost golden ages, for continents erased by forces beyond control? Or is it because we sense that what is written as history is already incomplete, curated by those who chose what survives and what disappears? The Victorian age that gave birth to Lemuria was also an age of empire, where colonial narratives sought to impose order upon ancient traditions, often dismissing indigenous accounts as mere fables. And yet, in the gaps left by their dismissals, the myth of Lemuria thrived, a counter-history that asked if what was lost might be greater than what was preserved. The tension remains unresolved. On one hand, geology insists the Indian Ocean's ridges and plateaus belong to ages long before humanity. On the other, folklore and scattered traces suggest that floods and erasures have haunted this region in more recent memory. Between them lies Lemuria, a name that is both scientific and mythic, a bridge between fossils and forgotten poetry. The Indian Ocean becomes not merely a body of water, but a veil, a surface concealing stories written in tectonic shifts and in human longing alike. Beneath its waves, whether real or imagined, lies the possibility that civilizations can vanish not only from land, but from the very record of time. And so the first step into Lemuria is not to dive into the ocean itself, but into the fracture between what is known and what is dreamed. It is to hear Sclater's quiet zoological observation and to see how it resonated with poets, mystics, and seekers of hidden truths. It is to confront the question, how much of our past is an accident of survival, and how much has been erased, either by water or by will? Each story of Lemuria, whether in geology, folklore, or esoteric speculation, is a shard, a broken piece of something vaster. Together they form not certainty, but a riddle whose answer has been swallowed. And it is precisely this silence that pulls us further, as if the sea itself were beckoning us into its hidden chambers. The mystery of Lemuria deepens when we follow the currents of cultural memory that swirl around the Indian Ocean's rim. Ancient civilizations did not speak of continents in the geological sense, but they carried within their myths and rituals echoes of lands lost to the sea. In South India, the Sangam literature describes a fertile landmass called Kumari Kandam, a place where kings reigned and poets flourished before the encroaching waters dismantled their world. These texts, written in Tamil centuries ago, do not read as pure allegory. They speak with the grief of displacement, as though generations carried forward the memory of a vanished homeland. Could these verses, woven into cultural identity, be fragments of a truth half drowned by time? They present not a scientific explanation, but a haunting testimony, reminding us that memory can survive not in monuments, but in rhythm, cadence, and mythic lament. When explorers from Europe first encountered these traditions, they were puzzled by the similarities between far-flung cultures. Certain motifs appeared across Madagascar, Polynesia, and even the Pacific coasts of South America. Patterns of megalithic construction, navigational practices, and linguistic echoes. Scholars of the 19th century, seeking to connect these threads, often turned to the idea of a lost landmass that once provided a bridge for migration. The lemurs of Madagascar had given Sclater his inspiration, but the wider currents of diffusionist thought soon layered his zoological theory with a broader cultural resonance. The image of Lemuria became a possible stage upon which prehistoric journeys unfolded, a missing continent linking traditions that conventional history found difficult to connect. Whether or not such a land ever existed, the hypothesis created a framework in which myth and migration could be woven together. Archaeology complicates and enriches the question. Submerged along the coasts of India and Sri Lanka are ruins that resist easy explanation. At Pumpuhar, off the Tamil Nadu coast, divers in the late 20th century discovered structures that some interpreted as the remnants of ancient cities swallowed by the sea. In the Gulf of Cambay, sonar imaging revealed geometric formations beneath layers of silt, suggestive of human construction. Mainstream scholars caution against over-interpretation, pointing to natural processes that can mimic architecture, yet the possibility remains. The ocean may be concealing evidence of civilizations far older than the records suggest. Each stone beneath the waves whispers ambiguities, and in those ambiguities the name Lemuria continues to echo. Meanwhile, geology offers its own puzzles. The discovery of zircons, tiny, durable crystals in sand dredged from the Indian Ocean, has revealed ages far older than the volcanic islands nearby. Some of these crystals date back nearly 3 billion years, leading geologists to propose that fragments of continental crust now lie buried beneath the waves. One such fragment, christened Mauritia, once formed part of Gondwana before splitting and sinking. This does not confirm the Lemuria of Sclater or the Kumari Kandam of Tamil tradition, but it illustrates a truth more startling than myth. Continents are not eternal. They fracture, drown, and vanish into the abyss. If whole fragments of crust can sink, could not the memories of cultures along their edges sink with them, preserved only in distorted myth? Lemuria may not exist in the form once imagined, but the principle of loss it represents is grounded in the very fabric of Earth's geology. The Victorian imagination seized upon these discoveries, fusing them with esoteric narratives. Helena Blavatsky expanded upon Lemuria, envisioning it as the cradle of humanity's third root race. Her writings depicted tall, spiritually advanced beings who fell into corruption and were punished by cataclysm. Though modern readers may dismiss such accounts as fantasy, they reveal a deeper truth. Lemuria became a canvas for humanity's anxieties about origin and destiny. By imagining a race destroyed by moral decay, Blavatsky reflected the Victorian fear that civilization, too, could collapse under its own weight. Myth here was less about the past than about the fragility of the present. Yet behind the mysticism lies a question science itself cannot fully dismiss. How much of human prehistory remains unseen beneath the seas? During the last ice age, when sea levels were lower, vast coastal plains connected islands and continents. People lived there, hunted there, and built their settlements on ground that is now hundreds of feet underwater. Archaeologists have begun to uncover submerged sites off the coasts of Europe and Asia, confirming that human habitation once extended far beyond today's shorelines. In this light, the myths of Lemuria and Kumari Kandam acquire a new poignancy. They may not refer to a single lost continent, but to countless drowned homelands erased by the relentless rising of seas. The Indian Ocean, with its tectonic volatility and shifting coastlines, was a stage upon which such losses unfolded repeatedly, and in each loss, memory transformed into legend. This ambiguity unsettles the very idea of history. Textbooks present neat timelines, yet the Earth itself resists neatness. Each discovery of submerged land fragments, each sonar image of geometric shapes beneath the sea suggests that our record of human origin is incomplete, not because we lack imagination, but because the archive of the ocean is still locked. When a Tamil poet mourns for a kingdom lost to floods, is he recalling metaphor, or is he voicing the memory of an actual shore now erased? When a geologist holds a zircon older than the Himalayas, is it merely a relic of deep time, or a fragment of a continent that once hosted life, unseen, unrecorded? These questions linger without resolution, compelling us to peer deeper into the waters where knowledge dissolves. What makes Lemuria so enduring is not the certainty of its existence, but the void it represents. It is a reminder that history is built not only on what is found, but also on what is missing. Every myth of a sunken land reflects a primal anxiety, that civilizations, however grand, can vanish overnight. And every scientific discovery of drowned plateaus or submerged ruins confirms that such vanishings are not fiction. The Indian Ocean becomes a mirror, reflecting back our fear of impermanence, of stories swallowed whole. The name Lemuria lingers like an incantation because it points not to a resolved truth, but to an open wound, the silence of a sea that has swallowed more than we can measure. As this silence is explored, we must wonder whether the drowning of lands was solely a natural process. The suspicion of erasure, of deliberate concealment, shadows every discussion of forgotten continents. Were these myths marginalized by empire, dismissed to silence inconvenient histories of indigenous peoples? Were they overwritten by colonial narratives that demanded a linear, controlled account of human migration? Or is the concealment less political, more geological, the ocean itself acting as archivist, locking away chapters of history beyond our reach? Perhaps both forces converge, leaving us with fragments, questions, and a haunting sense of incompleteness. The riddle of Lemuria, then, is not only about geography, it is about how memory persists through erasure, how absence itself becomes a form of presence. In the songs of Tamil poets, in the sonar images of drowned coastlines, in the crystals dredged from the ocean floor, the outline of something lost takes shape. But like all outlines drawn in mist, it slips away when grasped. And so we linger, caught between myth and geology, between cultural grief and scientific rigor, unable to close the question. The waters of the Indian Ocean, stretching vast and inscrutable, seem to whisper that what is hidden remains hidden not by chance, but by design. The story of Lemuria cannot be confined to science or folklore alone, for its shape emerges most clearly where both worlds collide. On one side, geologists map tectonic scars, tracing how India tore away from Madagascar as Gondwana fractured, leaving behind submerged plateaus now cloaked in coral reefs. On the other, storytellers speak of kingdoms beneath the sea, where temples and palaces lie silent under silt and tide. These two visions appear to contradict, yet together they paint a picture of loss both natural and cultural, recorded in stone and remembered in myth. To explore Lemuria is to walk along this boundary, where evidence blurs into memory, and memory hardens into speculation. One striking aspect of the Indian Ocean is its role as a cradle of human movement. Archaeological studies suggest that early humans left Africa through coastal routes skirting its waters, settling in Arabia, India, and beyond. Genetic research reveals shared markers between populations of Madagascar, coastal India, and Southeast Asia, pointing to migrations that spanned thousands of miles. Malagasy culture today carries both African and Austronesian roots, a testament to voyages across vast distances long before modern maps existed. Could these migrations have been aided by land once exposed during lower sea levels, a chain of stepping stones that later disappeared beneath rising waters? If so, the memory of such vanished roots might have persisted as tales of a drowned continent, later woven into the mythos of Lemuria. Legends from different shores seem to whisper of similar events. In the Maldives, traditions tell of ancestral lands devoured by the sea. In Polynesia, stories describe islands that sank after divine punishment or catastrophic waves. Along the East African coast, Swahili folklore speaks of villages swallowed by sudden floods. The resonance of these stories suggests a shared human experience. the trauma of rising seas and shifting shorelines. While not proof of a single Lemurian continent, they reflect the same deep wound, an awareness that the ocean is not merely boundary but predator, capable of swallowing the ground beneath one's feet. These scattered narratives act like mirrors reflecting one another across the water, each carrying a fragment of a larger silence. The Indian Ocean floor itself is riddled with mysteries. The Seychelles rise as granitic islands, unusual in a sea dominated by volcanic formations. Their composition suggests they are remnants of continental crust, ancient shards torn from larger masses. To stand on those islands today is to stand upon a fragment of Gondwana, a survivor of a world long erased. When such discoveries reached the ears of scholars in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they fed the speculation that Lemuria was not fantasy, but a half-buried truth. Even as modern plate tectonics has redefined these ideas, the allure remains. That entire continents can vanish beneath the sea, leaving only scattered pieces behind like breadcrumbs for the imagination to follow. The debate over Lemuria also touches the politics of knowledge. In colonial times, European scholars often dismissed indigenous accounts as fables, while simultaneously borrowing their resonance to fuel speculative theories. The Tamil concept of Kumari Kandam, rooted in Sangam literature, was often reshaped by outsiders to fit the Lemurian mold, bending cultural memory to align with Western scientific imagination. This fusion produced a hybrid myth that carried both local grief and colonial distortion. To untangle them today is difficult, for the voices of the past overlap. What was once poetry of loss became evidence for a theory, and what was once scientific conjecture became myth. In this way, Lemuria is not only a question of geology, but also of how narratives are claimed, reinterpreted, and sometimes silenced. The ocean, however, resists silence for long. In recent decades, underwater archaeology has uncovered submerged structures off the coasts of Japan, India, and the Middle East. Each discovery rekindles debates about how much of human civilization might lie underwater, awaiting recognition. The ruins near Pumpuhar, off the Indian coast, are cited by some as possible remains of cities predating known Indian civilizations. Though skeptics caution against overreaching claims, the allure of these ruins is undeniable. They force us to reconsider the relationship between myth and memory, between what people say was lost and what stones beneath the sea suggest might have existed. Lemuria, in this light, becomes less about a single continent and more about the persistence of a question. What lies drowned, forgotten, beneath the waves? Even language carries traces of this riddle. The root of the word lemur comes from the Latin for spirits of the dead, and perhaps unintentionally, Sclater's term for his hypothetical land conjured an image of a continent haunted by ghosts. It is fitting, for Lemuria is less a place than a presence, an absence that refuses to be absent. It surfaces in myths of lost lands, in the shimmering lines of poetry, in the sonar pings of oceanographers, and in the visions of mystics. Each version speaks not only to geography, but to the human need to anchor identity in a world of shifting ground. A lost continent becomes a metaphor for forgotten ancestry, a way of imagining roots deeper than recorded history permits. But one must ask, why do we cling to these myths of submerged worlds? Perhaps because they reflect an intuition that history is always incomplete, that what we inherit is only a fraction of what has been. Civilizations rise, but the traces they leave can be fragile, washed away by tides or buried by silt. Lemuria embodies that fragility, a reminder that memory itself can sink, leaving behind only echoes. To imagine Lemuria is to confront the uncomfortable truth that what we call history is a survivor's tale, told from the fragments that remain, while countless other stories lie drowned. The Indian Ocean, vast and inscrutable, continues to conceal more than it reveals. Each expedition, each geological survey offers only glimpses. But perhaps this incompleteness is the point. Lemuria remains powerful precisely because it is unresolved, because it dwells in the space between fact and dream. It is an invitation to question, to wonder, to acknowledge that silence can be as eloquent as evidence. And so, standing on the shores of India, Madagascar, or the scattered islands in between, one can gaze out across the waves and feel the weight of what might lie hidden below. The water becomes both mirror and shroud, reflecting our longing while concealing the very truths we seek. Thus, Lemuria persists not as a continent on any map, but as an emblem of the unknown. It is the geography of absence, the mythology of silence, the archaeology of possibility. Its story cannot be closed, for every attempt to pin it down leads only to more questions, more fragments, more silences. And perhaps that is why its allure endures, because it asks us to live with uncertainty, to recognize that beneath the calm surface of the sea lies an abyss where memory and geology, myth and science, grief and imagination all dissolve into one. The fascination with Lemuria grew in an age when science itself was learning to look beneath the surface of the earth, when the newly forming disciplines of geology and archaeology were shaking the confidence of long-established traditions. The 19th century did not only give us Charles Darwin's theories of evolution and Sclater's speculation about lemurs, but also a deepening sense that history stretched further back than scripture or chronicle could contain. Into that widening gap between what was known and what was guessed, Lemuria poured like water into a hollow space, filling it with possibility. For Victorians already captivated by Atlantis, the suggestion of a sunken land in the Indian Ocean was irresistible. It became a symbol of how the earth itself could conceal vast and ancient truths, truths waiting to resurface if only one knew where to look. Yet the idea did not remain confined to London salons or scientific journals. It spread outward, merging with older traditions, taking on colors and tones far beyond its original zoological framing. In Sri Lanka, some scholars linked the ancient chronicles of submerged cities to the notion of a vanished continent. In Madagascar, where unique species had long puzzled naturalists, the theory offered a stage upon which to explain the island's remarkable biodiversity. Even in Australia, where Aboriginal traditions spoke of ancestral lands drowned by rising seas, echoes were found that seemed to resonate with the Lemurian idea. In this way, a theory born from the study of small primates expanded into a global metaphor for what was hidden, forgotten, or denied. Theosophy, with its hunger for secret wisdom, seized upon Lemuria with particular zeal. Helena Blavatsky wrote of vast epochs in which Lemurians lived before the dawn of recorded history, a race not merely human, but something more primal, beings of towering stature whose downfall came through spiritual decline. She placed them in a cosmic narrative, where civilizations rose and fell in cycles of millennia, each extinguished not only by physical cataclysm, but by moral failure. It was not geology that destroyed them, but destiny, the inexorable turning of a wheel larger than any human design. Such visions found eager readers, for they spoke to a yearning that science could not satisfy. The need to see human existence as part of a greater, mysterious unfolding, one in which every myth of flood and fall might be connected. Still, if we strip away the mysticism, the persistence of flood myths across cultures remains difficult to ignore. Nearly every coastline culture tells of waters that rose, of cities consumed, of a boundary crossed between land and sea. In Mesopotamia, the tale of Utnapishtim echoes the later biblical flood of Noah. In South Asia, Manu is warned of rising waters by a divine fish and builds a vessel to save life. In Southeast Asia and Oceania, countless legends describe islands swallowed without warning. Are these coincidences of imagination, or distant memories of real events when the Ice Age ended and the oceans climbed relentlessly higher? Between 20 and 10,000 years ago, seas rose by more than 100 meters, drowning coastlines where people had lived for generations. Entire landscapes disappeared, and with them, languages, temples, and stories. What survives may be only fragments, refracted into myth, but they speak with the same voice, of land that was and land that is no more. The Indian Ocean holds some of the most evocative hints. Off the coast of India, sonar has mapped what appear to be rectilinear patterns beneath the silt, while in Sri Lanka, divers have reported walls and columns resting on the seabed. None of these finds have yielded definitive proof of cities, yet they compel further exploration. In the Gulf of Mannar, fishermen tell of ruins glimpsed in shallow waters, stories passed down through generations. In the Maldives, oral tradition recalls ancestors fleeing waves that consumed their homes. Each tale may be shaped by exaggeration, yet each carries a kernel of trauma, the shadow of an event lived and remembered. Could the myths of Lemuria be the distant echo of these submerged experiences, magnified into the scale of a continent by imagination's need for grandeur? Modern science often reacts with caution, reminding us that the Indian Ocean floor reveals fragments of Gondwana too ancient for human settlement. The zircons of Mauritia, the granite of the Seychelles, the volcanic ridges that stretch like scars across the seabed, all belong to ages long before Homo sapiens. Yet this very truth deepens the mystery. If continents can drown, if vast land masses can vanish beneath waves, why not also the cities of more recent prehistory? The absence of proof does not mean absence of possibility. The ocean floor is vast, largely unmapped, its secrets buried beneath layers of sediment. What might still lie hidden in those depths is less a matter of fantasy than of patience. But perhaps the greater question is why we are drawn to such mysteries at all. Lemuria's power is not only geological or archaeological, it is psychological. It embodies the fear that civilization itself is fragile, that what we build can vanish overnight. It also embodies hope, that the past is larger than what we are told, that hidden beneath the official record are stories yet to be discovered. For cultures marginalized by dominant histories, Lemuria and its variants such as Kumari Kandam became symbols of pride, proof that their roots stretched deeper than colonial narratives allowed. For seekers of esoteric truth, it became a stage for humanity's spiritual drama. For scientists, it served as a reminder that the Earth's surface is never final, that land and sea are in perpetual negotiation. This ambiguity is what gives Lemuria its enduring presence. It is not simply a place, but a riddle, one that refuses to resolve. Each attempt to define it, scientific, mythic, esoteric, leaves gaps where silence lingers. It is a reminder that history itself is stitched together from what survives, and what survives is often only a fraction. The rest is silence, and in that silence, imagination weaves. Perhaps Lemuria's true existence lies not beneath the ocean floor, but in the space between knowledge and longing, in the human need to see continuity where only fragments remain. To contemplate Lemuria is to contemplate absence. It is to stand at the edge of the sea, watching the horizon dissolve into haze, and to wonder what lies beyond sight. It is to listen to the stories of poets and fishermen, and to hear, beneath the details, the rhythm of loss. It is to walk through museums of fossils and zircons and know that the stones tell only part of the tale. The rest lies beneath, unreachable, yet felt like the pulse of something just beyond comprehension. And perhaps it is this that draws us, the recognition that we are children of both presence and absence, inheritors of a history both written and erased. Lemuria, whether real or imagined, becomes the emblem of that inheritance, a mirror in which we see not certainty, but possibility. In the end, it is not about whether Lemuria existed in the way Sclater or Blavatsky described. It is about the questions it forces us to ask, the silences it refuses to let us forget. Did civilizations rise and fall before our own? Have memories of drowned lands been preserved in myth across millennia? How much of what we call history is merely the shadow of what remains, while the vast body of truth lies submerged? These questions do not end. They deepen, like the ocean itself, drawing us ever further into its darkness. As the 19th century unfolded, Lemuria became more than a scientific hypothesis. It became a cultural phenomenon, its name whispered across drawing rooms, academic halls, and esoteric circles. What began as Sclater's zoological explanation for the odd distribution of lemurs soon outgrew its modest origins. It was no longer just a missing landmass on a naturalist's map, but a symbol of everything unseen, erased, or deliberately forgotten. The Victorian imagination, steeped in both imperial ambition and spiritual unease, found in Lemuria a stage upon which to project its contradictions. Here was a land that was simultaneously scientific and mystical, grounded in biology yet open to myth, a continent that seemed to exist more in the mind than on the earth, yet always with the possibility of being rediscovered. Theosophists were among the first to seize upon this ambiguity, and they amplified it until Lemuria shimmered with esoteric promise. Helena Blavatsky, in her monumental work, The Secret Doctrine, wove Lemuria into a grand cycle of human evolution. She described it as the home of a root race, beings who predated even Atlantis, a race whose destiny was to rise, fall, and vanish beneath the sea. To her followers, Lemuria was not simply a scientific puzzle, it was a spiritual homeland, a key to understanding the hidden architecture of human history. While mainstream scholars dismissed her visions as fantasy, they captured the imagination of readers around the world. Lemuria, in Blavatsky's hands, became a mirror reflecting humanity's longing for origin stories deeper than archaeology could provide. Yet while mystics filled the void with cosmic drama, geologists and naturalists continued to probe the Earth's scars for more mundane answers. As theories of continental drift and plate tectonics began to emerge in the early 20th century, the idea of Lemuria as a vast, single landmass connecting Madagascar, India, and Australia lost its footing. Alfred Wegener's theory of continental drift, initially ridiculed, eventually provided a more robust framework. The continents had once been united in Gondwana, and their separation explained the distribution of species far more convincingly than a sunken land bridge. But even as Lemuria dissolved under the pressure of tectonic science, its ghost remained. The name lingered in popular consciousness because it had already outgrown its origins. It was now less about zoology and more about what had been lost to human memory. What makes Lemuria distinct from Atlantis is its geography. Atlantis was placed by Plato beyond the Pillars of Hercules, somewhere in the Atlantic. It was a moral tale, a philosophical allegory. Lemuria, by contrast, was born of scientific necessity, its name attached to a real body of water, the Indian Ocean, which itself has long been a cradle of mystery. This ocean, surrounded by some of the world's oldest civilizations, from Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley to Egypt and East Africa, holds within its depths fragments of geological history and traces of human migration. The placement of Lemuria in these waters gives it a particular gravity, for this is not a remote or mythical ocean, but one that shaped the trajectories of real civilizations, one that has been sailed for millennia, its waves carrying both trade and stories. Archaeological hints add further tension. Along the coast of India, researchers have uncovered evidence of settlements that predate written history, some submerged by shifting tides. Off the Gulf of Cambay, sonar surveys revealed patterns that some interpret as the outlines of ancient cities, though skeptics remain cautious. Even where natural explanations are sufficient, the human imagination returns to the same question. How much lies beneath the waves, unrecorded and unacknowledged? Lemuria, in this sense, is not so much disproven as transmuted. It becomes a metaphor for all that is hidden by water, all the chapters of history that sank with rising seas after the Ice Age, all the ruins we have not yet discovered. Cultural memory plays its part as well. The Tamil Sangam texts speak of vast lands lost to floods, dynasties erased, and poets wandering displaced across shrunken territories. These stories do not name Lemuria, but they carry its essence: the grief of displacement, the longing for a homeland that no longer exists. Colonial scholars, hearing these accounts, often folded them into their own theories, conflating Kumari Kandam with Lemuria, using one to validate the other. Yet the fusion was never perfect. For the Tamil people, Kumari Kandam was a sacred loss, an ancestral memory woven into identity. For Western theorists, Lemuria was a puzzle to solve, a scientific curiosity. Where they overlapped, myth and science blurred into a hybrid story that refused to stay confined in either realm. The Indian Ocean itself remains a vast archive, mostly unread. Less than a quarter of its seabed has been mapped in detail. Submerged plateaus, ridges, and microcontinents lie scattered like broken bones beneath the waves. Among them is Mauritia, identified through zircon crystals dredged from volcanic sands, fragments of a landmass that once connected Madagascar to India before tectonics pulled it apart and buried it. Mauritia does not prove Lemuria in the mythic sense, but it affirms the principle. Continents are not eternal. They can fracture, sink and vanish. And when land vanishes, so too do the stories of those who may once have walked upon it. Lemuria's endurance in the imagination stems from this truth. The earth has erased entire landscapes before, and it may do so again. The endurance of Lemuria reveals something profound about the human relationship with history. We are never satisfied with what we know. Every discovery opens new silences, new gaps, new absences that demand filling. Lemuria is one of those absences, a name for a continent that might never have been, but whose possibility illuminates the fragility of human memory. It is a reminder that the record of history is selective, shaped by survival, by chance, and by power. What we remember is only what we can recover, and what we can recover is only a fraction of what once existed. Lemuria lingers as the haunting embodiment of everything beyond that fraction. If Atlantis is the story of hubris punished, Lemuria is the story of silence. It asks no questions of morality, but rather of memory. What happens when an entire landscape vanishes? How do its stories survive? How do they mutate in poetry, in myth, in whispered fragments passed across generations? Perhaps Lemuria is not a single continent at all, but the accumulated grief of all drowned lands, all forgotten homelands, all cities swallowed by tide and time. To invoke its name is to acknowledge that what is lost still presses against us, that the sea is not merely emptiness, but a vault of erasures. Standing on the shores of the Indian Ocean, gazing at the restless horizon, one can feel that presence. The waves crash and retreat, but their rhythm carries more than water. They carry absence itself, the weight of stories unrecorded, civilizations unnamed, ruins uncounted. Whether Lemuria was ever real in the geological sense may matter less than the fact that it remains real in the imagination. It is the embodiment of a truth deeper than proof, that human history is incomplete, and that what has been forgotten might yet be more vast than what is remembered. To trace the contours of Lemuria is to follow shadows across disciplines, for it lies equally in the folds of science, myth, and the half-remembered echoes of cultural grief. By the early 20th century, Lemuria had begun to fracture under the weight of tectonic science, yet rather than vanishing, it splintered into new forms, part metaphor, part mystery, part mirror. As geologists revealed that continents themselves drift and divide, the grand narrative of a single lost landmass in the Indian Ocean seemed less plausible. But paradoxically, this did not weaken Lemuria's hold. Instead, the possibility that whole fragments of crust had drowned only confirmed the deeper truth that the Earth is capable of swallowing its own history. Lemuria became not a single geological explanation, but a name for a broader unease, the recognition that what we know is built upon the ruins of what we do not. In South India, the memory of Kumari Kandam persisted, unshaken by Western corrections. The Sangam literature remained, filled with poems that described fertile lands, long rivers, and cities erased by encroaching seas. To Tamil scholars and cultural nationalists in the 20th century, these texts were not fables, but fragments of a true history that colonial powers had long ignored. Linking Kumari Kandam with Lemuria became an act of reclamation, a way of asserting that South India's heritage reached into prehistory, far beyond the timelines drawn by outsiders. Here, the myth was less about vanished continents than about cultural survival, proof that identity could withstand even the erasures of empire. Lemuria thus transformed into a political symbol, a stage upon which the struggles of memory and power played out. Meanwhile, outside the circles of scholarship, Lemuria entered popular culture in unexpected ways. Mystics, novelists, and visionaries began to populate it with entire civilizations. Some imagined spiritual adepts who preserved ancient wisdom in crystalline temples. Others envisioned hybrid creatures dwelling in vast jungles beneath a tropical sun. In California, esoteric communities even claimed that the survivors of Lemuria had migrated into hidden sanctuaries within Mount Shasta, living unseen beneath the mountain's icy crown. These stories, though fantastical, reveal how the idea of Lemuria had escaped the control of science and become an open canvas for imagination. The name no longer referred to a specific geography, but to the archetype of the lost world itself. A vessel for every longing for hidden wisdom, every suspicion that history is incomplete. Yet beneath the layers of fantasy, the Indian Ocean continued to yield whispers of real enigmas. Geologists studying the Mascarene Plateau and the Laccadive Ridge discovered unusual formations, remnants of continental crust buried under volcanic flows. Zircon crystals older than the ocean floor on which they were found spoke of vanished fragments, places where land had once stood before being drowned and reshaped. While mainstream science insisted that these fragments were too ancient to have witnessed human life, they still served as a powerful reminder. The ocean conceals histories we cannot fully retrieve. For those who already believed in Lemuria, these discoveries were confirmations, proof that what had been dismissed as myth might still rest, half buried in geological scars. Flood myths, too, continued to echo as cultural testimony. The Polynesians spoke of Hiva, a great homeland lost to the sea. Aboriginal Australians told of coasts swallowed, forcing migrations inland. Even in East Africa, tales of drowned villages persisted, passed down through generations, who saw the sea not only as giver of life, but also as thief. To dismiss all of these as allegory risks ignoring the collective memory of trauma encoded in story. They may not describe Lemuria as Sclater imagined it, but they describe Lemuria in essence. The awareness that the sea has taken more than it has given, that the boundary between land and ocean is fragile, and that the world humans inherit is already haunted by absences. As the 20th century advanced, technology brought new tools for peering beneath the waves. Sonar mapping revealed shapes that stirred speculation, grids on the seafloor, terraces resembling steps, formations that seemed too orderly to be natural. Some were dismissed as pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. Others remain under study, their meaning ambiguous. In the Gulf of Cambay, for instance, researchers announced the discovery of structures that appeared to predate known Indian civilizations, though debates continue over whether they are artificial or natural. What matters, however, is not resolution, but the persistence of the question. Lemuria endures because the ocean itself resists final answers. It is not so much disproved as deferred, an idea always waiting just beyond the reach of certainty. In literature and philosophy, Lemuria also acquired a symbolic weight. It became a metaphor for the unconscious, for all that is buried within the human psyche. Just as the sea conceals ruins, so too does the mind conceal memories. To speak of Lemuria was to speak of forgotten depths within ourselves, layers of identity and history drowned by the tides of time. Poets and thinkers drew upon it to express the fragility of memory, the yearning for what lies beyond recall. The lost continent became both geological and psychological, a mirror reflecting the hidden interior landscapes of humanity. What lingers most, however, is the sense of absence. Lemuria is not remembered because of what we know about it, but because of what we do not. It is the continent of the unsaid, the geography of silence. Every myth of flood, every sonar anomaly, every zircon dredged from the seabed deepens its shadow, making it larger in imagination precisely because it remains ungraspable. It haunts us because it refuses to resolve. And in that refusal lies its power. It forces us to confront the limitations of history, to admit that what we call knowledge is fragile, provisional, partial. Lemuria is not a story of certainty, but of humility, a reminder that the earth is always larger than the maps we draw upon it. Standing on the shore of the Indian Ocean today, watching its horizon blur into haze, one can almost feel the pull of what lies beneath. The waves carry trade and memory, myths and migrations, but they also conceal. Beneath them may lie the ruins of cities, or only stones sculpted by tides. Beneath them may lie the bones of continents, or only silence. But whether real or imagined, Lemuria endures because it is more than a place. It is the presence of absence, the whisper of what has been erased yet refuses to stay forgotten. It is the story of how humanity remembers through forgetting, how myth grows in the spaces where history fails. And so the ocean remains, vast and inscrutable, its depths a question mark stretching across time, asking not for answers but for wonder. As Lemuria's name echoed across the world, it began to shape itself into a tapestry woven from fragments of fact, speculation, and myth. By the early 20th century, the scientific establishment had largely abandoned the idea of a massive land bridge linking India, Madagascar, and Australia, but the continent refused to die in the imagination of scholars and seekers alike. Instead, it mutated into something more elusive, an emblem of all that remains hidden beneath the waves, a riddle suspended between geology and memory. To speak of Lemuria was no longer to debate zoological puzzles, but to confront the deeper question: how much of human history has been drowned, silenced, or erased? The Indian Ocean itself holds the key to this haunting uncertainty. It is a restless ocean, bordered by some of the world's oldest cultures and scarred by tectonic rifts that tell of continents torn apart. Beneath its surface lie plateaus such as the Kerguelen and Mascarene, geological remnants that remind us the Earth is never still. Some of these fragments, like Mauritia, once formed part of Gondwana before they slipped beneath volcanic layers and oceanic crust. Modern geophysics insists that these drowned lands are older than humanity, yet the fact of their disappearance lends a chilling weight to the myth of Lemuria. If entire microcontinents could vanish, what prevents us from imagining that whole coastlines, and with them the lives of countless people, have been erased in more recent epochs? The end of the last ice age offers one possible explanation for why myths of submerged kingdoms are nearly universal. As glaciers melted, sea levels rose more than 100 meters, swallowing continental shelves and the settlements that lined them. For early humans, whose lives were bound to coastlines for fishing, trade, and survival, such floods would have been catastrophic. The trauma of watching familiar lands vanish into the sea may have carved itself into collective memory, passed down as myths of lost homelands. Lemuria, in this light, may not be a geological continent, but the cultural memory of countless drowned landscapes, remembered not with scientific precision, but with poetic grief. This interpretation casts a new light on the Sangam literature of Tamil Nadu. These ancient poems speak of rivers flowing through fertile lands now gone, of dynasties erased by floodwaters, of poets mourning cities swallowed whole. To dismiss such accounts as mere allegory risks underestimating the power of memory preserved in verse. Scholars argue that Kumari Kandam, the land described in these texts, may reflect real losses endured when rising seas consumed the southern coasts of India. For Tamil thinkers, connecting Kumari Kandam with Lemuria was not simply an act of imagination, but a way of restoring dignity to memory, of asserting that their people's past stretched deep into antiquity. Here, Lemuria became more than myth. It became an identity, a statement of endurance against the erasures of empire. Meanwhile, outside India, Lemuria evolved in stranger directions. Esoteric groups in Europe and America populated it with beings both divine and human. Some saw it as the cradle of a lost race whose wisdom was encoded in symbols scattered across the globe. Others, more fanciful still, suggested that survivors of Lemuria had migrated to secret sanctuaries deep within the earth, preserving ancient knowledge until the world was ready once again. Mount Shasta in California became, for some, the supposed refuge of Lemurian exiles. While these stories stray far from geology, they reveal how the lost continent functioned as a vessel for longing, a place where seekers could project their desire for hidden wisdom and forgotten ancestry. The absence of proof became the very ground upon which imagination flourished. Yet not all speculation drifted so far from Earth. In recent decades, advances in marine archaeology have uncovered evidence that demands attention. Off the coast of India, in the Gulf of Cambay, sonar surveys revealed geometric formations beneath layers of sediment, formations that some interpret as man-made. Similar reports from the waters near Pumpuhar suggest the outlines of submerged structures. While mainstream scholars often caution against premature conclusions, the fact remains that human history along these coasts is older than written chronologies allow. The Indus Valley civilization is not the beginning of South Asian settlement, but only the fragment that survived on land. The rest may lie beneath the waters, hidden, uncounted, waiting. For those who seek Lemuria, these discoveries are tantalizing hints that the myths are not wholly empty. The persistence of Lemuria also reflects something larger, a profound unease with the neatness of history. Official narratives are written in lines too straight, timelines too clean, as though human memory can be compressed into a sequence without gaps. But Lemuria points to the abyss between those lines, the vast silences that written history cannot bridge. It whispers that what we know is provisional, shaped as much by erasure as by survival. It asks whether civilizations might have risen and fallen before our own, leaving behind traces too deeply buried, too thoroughly drowned, to be recovered by ordinary means. To entertain Lemuria is not to deny science, but to acknowledge its limits. The ocean floor remains one of the least explored regions of our planet. Vast areas lie unmapped, sediments lying thicker than the pyramids, preserving or concealing whatever stories they contain. In those depths may rest nothing but stone, or perhaps ruins older than our imagination allows. Until the seabed is fully charted, the possibility cannot be erased. Lemuria thus becomes a metaphor for science itself. The recognition that knowledge is always incomplete, that the world holds more than we can measure. But Lemuria is not only an oceanic riddle, it is also a human mirror. To speak of lost continents is to confess our fear of impermanence. Civilizations like Rome, Egypt, or the Maya rose to staggering heights, only to fade into ruin. If such empires could fall, how much more fragile is memory itself, built upon coastlines and vulnerable to tides? Lemuria reminds us that nothing endures unbroken, not land, not culture, not even the record of existence. Yet this fragility carries its own strange beauty. For in the silence left behind, imagination rises, weaving myths that preserve what facts cannot. The Indian Ocean, wide and inscrutable, continues to conceal its secrets. Scientists probe with instruments, poets with metaphor, mystics with vision. Each sees a different Lemuria, yet all acknowledge the same truth. The sea is not empty, but full of absence, a presence felt precisely because it withholds. Standing upon its shores, one can almost hear the hum of that absence, like a voice speaking from beneath the waves. Lemuria may be gone, or it may never have been, but its power lies in the question it refuses to release. How much of our past lies drowned, and how much has been erased not only by water, but by time itself? Thus Lemuria endures, not as proof, but as provocation, not as certainty, but as invitation. It urges us to listen more closely to myth, to take seriously the silence of the ocean, to recognize that history is not a finished story, but a manuscript riddled with erasures. The continent may remain unseen, but its shadow stretches across our imagination, asking us to peer deeper into the waters and into ourselves, where the drowned fragments of memory still linger. The endurance of Lemuria reveals something profound about the ways human beings hold on to memory, even when the memory itself is fragmentary and uncertain. A continent that may never have existed in the physical sense continues to occupy a vast territory in the human imagination. It is less a question of geography than of longing, less about precise coastlines and tectonic maps than about the ache of something missing, a recognition that absence itself leaves traces. To dwell on Lemuria is to confront the silence of oceans and the way they swallow more than land. They swallow histories, genealogies, and the fragile evidence of lives lived along their shores. Modern oceanography has mapped parts of the Indian Ocean floor, but enormous swaths remain unexplored, covered in sediments so thick that even sonar struggles to penetrate. We know of ridges, plateaus, and drowned fragments of Gondwana, such as Mauritia, but these are fragments of pre-human worlds, ancient scars in the planet's crust. Still, their very presence demonstrates a truth that myth had already suggested. Continents can vanish. They can fracture, slide beneath volcanic flows, sink under shifting tectonic plates. To those who dream of Lemuria, these facts are enough to keep the door ajar. If the Earth can erase entire land masses in deep time, why should it not also have erased the traces of civilizations along more recent coasts? The silence of the seafloor, so immense and so resistant to exploration, becomes fertile ground for speculation. It is in this space of speculation that folklore thrives. The Tamil legends of Kumari Kandam speak not only of land lost, but of culture erased, dynasties destroyed, knowledge scattered. The grief is palpable in the verses that survive, as if poetry itself became a vessel for memory too fragile to survive in stone. Alongside these traditions, other coastal cultures tell of similar losses: the Polynesian homeland of Hiva, the Maldivian stories of ancestors displaced by floods, the Aboriginal accounts of drowned coastlines remembered in oral tradition for more than 7,000 years. Each narrative may be unique, but together they echo with the same cadence: a lament for what the sea has taken. Lemuria becomes the umbrella under which all of these voices gather, a symbolic name for every land that vanished, every memory submerged. The persistence of these myths suggests that they may not be fabrications but distortions of truth carried across centuries. When glaciers melted and seas rose at the end of the Pleistocene, millions of square kilometers of land disappeared. The coastlines we know today are not the ones our ancestors knew. Great river valleys were flooded, fertile plains drowned, and entire regions transformed. People living in those times would have witnessed these losses directly, carrying forward the memory of trauma in the only way available: story. What geologists call sea level rise, ancient peoples experienced as catastrophe. Lemuria, in its many forms, may therefore be a cultural memory of real events, transmuted into myth, but anchored in lived experience. And yet, even as science explains these processes, it cannot erase the allure of the mythic continent. For Lemuria is not only about what happened, but about what might have been. It raises the tantalizing possibility that civilizations existed before the ones we know. Civilizations erased so completely that only myths recall them. This is a question that archaeology approaches with caution but cannot fully dismiss. Discoveries of submerged ruins near India, Japan, and the Mediterranean hint at structures older than expected, though always shrouded in debate. Each contested find becomes fuel for the imagination. Could Lemuria have been one such drowned cradle of culture, erased before history began to write itself in clay tablets and stone inscriptions? The absence of definitive proof only deepens the fascination, for in absence imagination finds its richest soil. Philosophically, Lemuria also speaks to the fragility of history as we construct it. We like to believe that history is a complete record, that timelines stretch unbroken from origin to present. But in truth, history is riddled with silences, gaps where memory has failed or evidence has vanished. Lemuria embodies this silence. It is the name we give to the awareness that much of our past is missing, erased not only by geological forces, but also by human ones: wars, empires, the rewriting of narratives to suit the victors. A lost continent becomes the ultimate metaphor for lost histories, for everything that was deliberately buried or forgotten. In this sense, Lemuria is as much about power as it is about memory. When colonial scholars dismissed Tamil legends of Kumari Kandam as myth, they were not only rejecting folklore, but erasing cultural identity, imposing their own narrative of what counted as history. By claiming Lemuria as their own invention, born from zoology and later disproven by geology, they stripped away its local resonance. Yet the story persisted among Tamil intellectuals and poets, reshaped into a symbol of endurance. Lemuria became a battleground over who has the right to define the past. Was it the scientists in European universities, or the people whose ancestors carried memory in verse and song? The debate reveals a deeper truth. Lemuria endures precisely because it is unresolved. It cannot be pinned down to a single explanation, neither purely geological, nor purely mythic, nor purely esoteric. It is all of these at once, overlapping and shifting like waves upon the ocean it supposedly inhabits. Each perspective adds a layer, and together they form a portrait of absence that is strangely complete. To study Lemuria is not to seek a final answer, but to embrace the ambiguity, to accept that history itself is woven from both what is known and what is unknowable. Perhaps this is why Lemuria continues to fascinate long after its scientific death. It is not simply a curiosity of 19th century zoology, but a living symbol of the human condition. We are creatures of memory, yet our memories are always incomplete. We are creatures of knowledge, yet our knowledge is always partial. Lemuria embodies that gap, that haunting awareness that much of our story is missing. And in naming that absence, we make it present. To stand at the edge of the Indian Ocean and think of Lemuria is to feel both awe and melancholy. The waves that crash on the shore have rolled across the same waters for thousands of years, hiding beneath them whatever ruins, fragments, or silences the ocean chose to claim. Whether or not Lemuria was ever real in the way Sclater or Blavatsky imagined, it is real in another sense. It is the geography of loss, the mythology of erasure, the silence that speaks louder than proof. It is the reminder that the world we inherit is built upon layers of presence and absence alike, and as long as the sea continues to conceal, Lemuria will continue to haunt. The myth of Lemuria reaches further than any single ocean, for its resonance touches the way humanity understands beginnings, ends, and the spaces in between. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Lemuria's outlines faded from scientific discourse, yet they grew sharper in the landscapes of myth, spirituality, and cultural resistance. No longer bound by zoology or plate tectonics, Lemuria became an archetype. The lost world, the erased memory, the continent that exists more vividly in absence than in presence. Its power lies precisely in the tension between proof and silence, between what can be charted on maps and what must be carried in imagination. In theosophical writings, Lemuria became the birthplace of humanity's primal root race, a civilization destroyed not merely by geological upheaval, but by spiritual corruption. These visions, dismissed by science, nevertheless captured something haunting. The idea that civilizations rise only to collapse under forces greater than themselves, that greatness carries within it the seeds of erasure. Whether described as a cosmic judgment or as the blind violence of tectonics, the theme is the same: fragility. To imagine Lemuria is to imagine a world already lost, and in doing so, to sense the precariousness of our own. Yet Lemuria also became a vessel for cultural pride and identity. For the Tamil people, Kumari Kandam was not an abstract myth, but a memory of ancestral land, preserved in Sangam poetry with its mournful imagery of rivers and palaces swallowed by the sea. In the 20th century, as colonial powers dismissed these traditions as fables, Tamil scholars reasserted them, linking Kumari Kandam with Lemuria as a way to reclaim history from erasure. Here, Lemuria shifted from scientific hypothesis to political symbol, a counter-narrative resisting the imperial claim that only European archaeology could define the past. The lost continent became a statement of endurance, proof that memory persists even when geography is denied. Beyond India, Echoes of Lemuria appeared in other cultural traditions. In Madagascar, where lemurs themselves remain as living symbols of the lost land, oral histories recall migrations and displacements across the sea. In Polynesia, stories of vanished homelands, like Hiva, mirror the Tamil accounts of Kumari Kandam. Even in East Africa, legends of drowned villages resurface in folklore. These narratives, scattered yet resonant, seem to circle the Indian Ocean like fragments of a larger story. They may not describe a single continent, but together they speak of the same trauma. The ocean's capacity to erase entire worlds, leaving only the echoes of grief preserved in story. Geology, meanwhile, continues to deepen the ambiguity. The discovery of microcontinents like Mauritia, now buried beneath volcanic flows in the Indian Ocean, proves beyond doubt that land can vanish completely. Zircon crystals, billions of years old, dredged from the seabed, remind us that the crust itself is a palimpsest, written and rewritten through endless cycles of destruction. To science, these fragments belong to deep time, long before humans ever appeared. But to those drawn to Lemuria, they serve as tantalizing confirmations. If the Earth can erase entire continents, who is to say it has not erased entire civilizations? The silence of geology leaves space for myth, and in that space, Lemuria thrives. In popular culture, the lost continent has become a recurring motif. Writers of speculative fiction imagine it as a cradle of prehistoric wisdom, its ruins scattered across the globe in the form of megaliths and symbols. Mystics populate it with sages who withdrew into hidden sanctuaries, preserving secret knowledge for a future age. Even in modern conspiracy theories, Lemuria emerges as a ghostly presence, linked with Atlantis, with extraterrestrial visitors, with subterranean realms beneath mountains. These stories, though fantastical, reveal the enduring power of the archetype. Lemuria is not about factual history, but about the hunger for what lies beyond it, the suspicion that our story is far older and stranger than textbooks allow. Still, what makes Lemuria compelling is not its extravagance, but its humility. It is the recognition that history is incomplete, that memory is fragile, that civilizations are not guaranteed permanence. The very absence of proof becomes proof of absence, and yet the imagination resists. We refuse to accept that the ocean has erased everything. We search for ruins beneath the silt, for patterns in sonar maps, for echoes in ancient poetry. The search itself becomes part of the myth, an endless attempt to recover what cannot be recovered. In this way, Lemuria is less about discovery than about longing. The Indian Ocean, restless and inscrutable, continues to conceal its secrets. Scholars debate, divers explore, storytellers imagine. Each perspective adds a fragment to the picture, but none completes it. This incompleteness is what gives Lemuria its strange vitality. If it were ever proven or disproven absolutely, it would lose its hold. Instead, it endures as a riddle, a silence that insists on being heard. It becomes a reminder that the world is larger than our knowledge, that history is deeper than our records, that the sea is more than water. It is an archive of absence. Perhaps the true lesson of Lemuria lies not in whether it existed, but in what it represents. It is the name we give to everything history has lost: drowned coastlines, erased civilizations, silenced voices. It is the reminder that absence itself is part of our inheritance, that we are shaped as much by what we have forgotten as by what we remember. And in that sense, Lemuria is real, not beneath the waves, perhaps, but within the human psyche, within the grief and wonder that rise when we face the ocean and know that it has taken more than it has given. To stand upon the shore, listening to the rhythm of the tide, is to feel that truth. The waves carry not only salt and foam, but also silence, the silence of what has been erased. Lemuria lingers in that silence, not as a continent, but as a presence, a shadow reminding us that the earth itself is fragile, that history is broken, that absence, too, is a kind of memory. It is the geography of longing, the archaeology of silence, the mythology of everything we cannot hold. And perhaps that is why it endures, because it refuses to be forgotten, even when it may never have existed at all. By the mid-20th century, Lemuria had already shifted from the realm of scientific conjecture into the terrain of legend and imagination. Geologists, armed with the theory of plate tectonics, no longer needed a vanished continent to explain the distribution of species or the similarities of far-flung coastlines. For science, the story of Lemuria had ended. Yet, paradoxically, it was precisely at this moment of scientific dismissal that the myth of Lemuria grew stronger. Stripped of its zoological origins, it became freer, untethered from maps and measurements, available instead as a symbol of what had been erased. It was now less a puzzle of biology than a meditation on absence, on the ways memory and loss take shape in human culture. The Indian Ocean, always at the heart of Lemuria's story, continued to stir curiosity. Scholars noted that its waters had long been a crossroads of trade and migration. Ancient seafarers carried spices, textiles, and stories from Africa to India, from Arabia to Southeast Asia. The ocean connected rather than divided, and in that connection lay the possibility of deep, forgotten histories. Could cultures separated by thousands of miles share echoes of the same myths because they once traced their origins to a drowned homeland? Or was the sea itself the bridge, spreading stories like currents, reshaping them as they traveled? In either case, Lemuria offered an explanation not just for biology, but for cultural resonance, a framework for thinking about the strange similarities that link distant peoples. In Tamil Nadu, the memory of Kumari Kandam refused to fade. As India emerged from colonial rule, intellectuals and poets reclaimed the lost land as a symbol of Tamil antiquity, a reminder that their culture's roots stretched back into epochs beyond the reach of colonial archaeology. Lemuria and Kumari Kandam blurred into one another, hybridized into a single narrative of pride and loss. What for Sclater had been a zoological land bridge, and for Blavatsky a mystical homeland, became for Tamils a political inheritance, a way of asserting that the South possessed its own deep time, its own Atlantis, its own story of erasure and survival. In this way, Lemuria revealed not only how myths can persist, but how they can adapt, shifting meaning as history demands. Beyond India, Lemuria resonated in stranger places. Mystics in California imagined its survivors dwelling beneath Mount Shasta, living in hidden chambers, luminous beings who guarded ancient wisdom. Esoteric groups linked Lemuria to Atlantis, creating elaborate maps of prehistoric civilizations, each rising and falling in cycles of spiritual corruption and cosmic punishment. Science dismissed such visions as fantasy, yet they thrived precisely because of their ambiguity. Lemuria became a blank page on which to project both fears and hopes. Fear that civilizations collapse into silence, and hope that some remnant of wisdom might endure, hidden from the world but waiting to be revealed. But while mysticism spun grand tales, fragments of archaeology kept alive the question of whether something tangible lay beneath the waves. Divers off the coast of Pumpuhar in Tamil Nadu reported ruins that seemed to stretch beneath the sea. In the Gulf of Cambay, sonar images revealed shapes that some argued were remnants of ancient cities. Skeptics pointed to natural formations, to the tendency of human eyes to impose patterns on stone. Yet the allure of these findings was undeniable. They reminded us that beneath the waters, history may lie buried, unseen, uncounted. Even if these ruins are not Lemuria, they echo its essence, the recognition that the sea conceals as much as it reveals. The myth also found unexpected allies in science. Studies of submerged coastlines across the world confirmed that rising seas at the end of the Ice Age erased vast tracts of land where humans once lived. Archaeologists identified drowned settlements in the Black Sea, off the coast of Japan, and in Europe's Doggerland. These were not lost continents, but lost worlds, fragments of humanity's deep past erased by water. In each case, myth and memory lingered. Flood stories, ancestral laments, visions of lands that once were. Lemuria became part of this broader pattern, less a singular mystery than a symbol of all drowned histories. It asked us to reconsider the arrogance of believing that we know the full span of human civilization when so much remains locked beneath the ocean floor. Philosophers began to see in Lemuria a metaphor for the unconscious mind. Just as continents sink beneath the ocean, so too do memories sink beneath awareness, buried but not erased. The myth of a drowned land became an allegory for the drowned parts of ourselves, the histories of the psyche that resurface only in dreams, in fragments, in sudden flashes of memory. To speak of Lemuria was to speak of hidden depths, of what lies beneath the visible, of the persistence of what has been silenced. This psychological reading gave the lost continent new life, transforming it into a language for inner as well as outer mysteries. And so Lemuria endured. It lived not because it could be proven, but because it could not. Its very absence gave it power, for absence is fertile ground. The less we know, the more we imagine, and the more we imagine, the more real it becomes in our collective consciousness. Lemuria is not only the geography of the ocean floor, it is the geography of longing, of grief, of the human need to tell stories about what has been lost. To stand at the edge of the Indian Ocean today is to feel that presence. The horizon stretches out in silence, the waves repeat their eternal rhythm, and beneath them lies a world we cannot fully know. Perhaps there are only stones, scars of tectonics, and ancient microcontinents long predating humanity. Or perhaps, hidden under layers of silt and sediment, there are fragments of forgotten lives, echoes of cities drowned by floods, voices that once sang poems now remembered only as myth. The ocean does not answer. It keeps its secrets, and in its silence we hear the whisper of Lemuria. The lost continent is less a question of proof than of presence. It is not found on maps, but in myths, in poems, in sonar anomalies, in the fragments of story that refuse to fade. Lemuria endures because it gives shape to the silence, because it names the absence that haunts history. Whether it was ever real in stone and soil matters less than the fact that it is real in us. It is the shadow beneath the waves, the echo in forgotten verses, the memory of loss carried forward in human imagination. And so long as oceans conceal, Lemuria will remain, a continent not of earth but of wonder, a reminder that what is lost can still shape the living. By the late 20th century, Lemuria had become a paradox, rejected by science, yet thriving in culture, dismissed in geology, yet alive in imagination. Its persistence reveals that human beings do not abandon myths simply because evidence fails to support them. Instead, myths transform, adapting to new contexts and new needs, like rivers that change course but continue to flow. Lemuria no longer needed to exist on maps to exert power. It survived as a symbol of everything that lies beyond certainty, everything drowned by time, everything history could not hold. What makes Lemuria different from other lost lands, like Atlantis, is the way it binds together both science and myth. Atlantis was born from philosophy, a parable spun by Plato to illustrate political and moral decline. Lemuria, by contrast, was born from a scientific riddle, an effort to explain the distribution of lemurs across distant lands. From the beginning, its roots lay in observation, in an attempt to solve a zoological puzzle. This gave Lemuria a strange credibility, even when disproved, for it began as science before becoming legend. To this day, its dual origin allows it to exist in two worlds at once, the rational and the mythic. In popular esotericism, Lemuria grew into a story of origins. Theosophists imagined it as the cradle of the third root race, a civilization destroyed when corruption overwhelmed spiritual clarity. Later writers, from occultists to New Age mystics, added their own layers, visions of Lemurians as tall, radiant beings, guardians of wisdom, teachers of forgotten arts. In California, stories spread of Lemurians retreating into Mount Shasta, where they continued to live in hidden sanctuaries. Though these tales have no grounding in geology, they illustrate the way Lemuria has been claimed as a vessel for longing, longing for wisdom lost, for ancestors erased, for a hidden continuity that connects the present to a more ancient world. But alongside these mystical visions, Lemuria persisted in more grounded traditions. Tamil scholars continued to hold fast to Kumari Kandam, the land described in Sangam poetry, which spoke of fertile plains and proud dynasties now lost to the sea. To them, Lemuria was not just myth, but memory, not fantasy, but ancestral grief. The merging of Kumari Kandam with Lemuria became a way of insisting that Tamil culture reached deep into antiquity, beyond the horizon set by colonial narratives. In this way, Lemuria became a site of resistance, a refusal to allow cultural memory to be dismissed as superstition. It was less about a continent beneath the ocean and more about the dignity of survival in the face of erasure. Meanwhile, science itself began to reveal truths that, while not confirming Lemuria, made its spirit harder to dismiss. Studies of submerged settlements across the world, from Doggerland in the North Sea to the ruins beneath the waters of Japan, confirmed that rising seas at the end of the Ice Age destroyed whole landscapes where people once lived. Archaeologists discovered evidence of villages now drowned, proving that flood myths preserved cultural memories of real events. The ocean, it seemed, was indeed an archive of erasure. If such erasures occurred in Europe and Asia, why not also in the Indian Ocean? Lemuria's myth resonated anew in light of these discoveries, not as literal geography, but a symbol of the many worlds that seas have consumed. Geological evidence added its own haunting details. Zircon crystals retrieved from the sands of the Indian Ocean revealed fragments of continental crust billions of years old, remnants of a drowned microcontinent now known as Mauritia. While no humans ever lived on Mauritia, its discovery reminded us that continents can vanish completely, leaving only fragments hidden beneath volcanic flows. The imagination needs little more. If land itself can disappear, then why not also the cities built upon its shores? Why not also the memory of its people? Lemuria persists because the earth itself whispers of erasure. This whisper reaches across cultures. Polynesian traditions recall Hiva, a homeland swallowed by waves. Aboriginal Australians tell of coasts erased by the sea, their oral histories confirmed by geological studies dating back thousands of years. East African folklore speaks of drowned villages, swallowed whole in storms. All these stories, scattered yet resonant, circle the Indian Ocean like fragments of a shared lament. They may not describe the same land, but they embody the same truth. Oceans erase, but memory resists erasure. Lemuria becomes the name we give that resistance, the echo that survives when the world itself has drowned. The question, then, is not whether Lemuria existed, but why it endures. It survives because it names something deeper than geography, the fragility of civilization, the incompleteness of history, the persistence of grief. Every myth of Lemuria is also a meditation on loss, a way of acknowledging that our record of the past is riddled with silences. Science offers facts, but facts alone cannot heal the wound of absence. Myth fills the silence, giving form to what has been erased. In this way, Lemuria belongs not only to the ocean but to the human mind, to the space where memory and imagination weave together. To stand at the edge of the Indian Ocean is to feel that presence. The horizon stretches endlessly, waves crashing in eternal rhythm, concealing beneath them whatever secrets remain. Perhaps there are only volcanic ridges and drowned crust, fragments of Gondwana long predating humanity. Or perhaps there are ruins, silted over and silent, fragments of forgotten settlements waiting to be rediscovered. The ocean does not answer. It holds its silence, and in that silence Lemuria speaks. What it says is not certainty, but possibility. It reminds us that the world is larger than our maps, that history is deeper than our texts, that memory is more fragile than we like to believe. Lemuria endures because it refuses closure, because it is a question that cannot be resolved. It is the geography of absence, the mythology of silence, the echo of everything history has lost. And perhaps that is why it continues to matter. Not because it was real, but because it reminds us that absence itself can be real, that what has been erased still shapes us. In the end, Lemuria is not a continent but a presence, a shadow beneath the waves, a reminder that the ocean is both giver and thief, both cradle and grave of human memory. The story of Lemuria deepens when viewed through the lens of cultural survival. Myths of lost lands are rarely just stories about geography. They are expressions of collective trauma, of memory carried across generations long after the landscapes themselves have vanished. Lemuria, though born in a 19th century scientific debate, quickly intertwined with these deeper traditions, becoming a vessel for grief and identity. Its endurance lies not in the precision of maps, but in the persistence of memory that refuses to be erased. Consider the Tamil tradition of Kumari Kandam, which survives in the verses of Sangam poetry. These poems describe rivers flowing through fertile lands, dynasties reigning over vast territories, and cities erased by floods. They do not sound like mere allegory. They speak with a voice of mourning, as though poets carried within them the echo of ancestral loss. When colonial scholars dismissed such verses as fable, they ignored the possibility that oral traditions preserve the memory of real events. The merging of Kumari Kandam with Lemuria in the 20th century was therefore more than a coincidence. It was an act of reclamation, a way of asserting that cultural memory is no less valid than scientific narrative. Lemuria became a symbolic homeland, a reminder that identity could endure even when geography had been erased. Beyond South India, similar echoes resound. In Madagascar, oral traditions describe migrations across the sea, hinting at movements long before recorded history. In Polynesia, the story of Hiva tells of an ancestral land swallowed by waves, its people forced to scatter across the Pacific. Aboriginal Australians preserve in their oral histories accounts of coastlines drowned by the rising seas at the end of the Ice Age, memories that geological studies have confirmed. In East Africa, fishermen still tell of villages claimed by sudden storms. Together, these stories form a chorus of lament. They do not all describe the same continent, but they embody the same truth: that oceans are not passive borders, but forces of erasure. Lemuria is less a place than a name for this shared grief, a symbol uniting scattered voices across time and water. The power of such myths is heightened by the discoveries of modern science. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of drowned settlements across the globe: Doggerland beneath the North Sea, villages under the waters of the Black Sea, submerged ruins off the coast of Japan. These are not legends but physical sites, proving that rising seas erased human worlds within the last 12,000 years. If so many drowned homelands are already known, why not others beneath the Indian Ocean? When sonar scans in the Gulf of Cambay revealed what appeared to be geometric structures buried under silt, speculation ran wild. Though debates continue over whether these formations are natural or man-made, the fact that they exist keeps the question alive. Every anomaly beneath the sea becomes a potential doorway into the unknown, an invitation to imagine what might still be hidden. Geology, too, continues to whisper reminders of erasure. The discovery of Mauritia, a microcontinent buried beneath volcanic flows in the Indian Ocean, proves that land can vanish so completely that only tiny fragments remain. Zircon crystals billions of years old, dredged from the seabed, speak of continents written and rewritten through cycles of destruction. Mainstream science insists these events predate humanity by millions of years. Yet the principle remains unsettling. The Earth itself is not stable, and continents are not eternal. For those drawn to Lemuria, this is all the confirmation required. If land can drown, then perhaps memory can drown with it, and yet resurface in myth, distorted but persistent. This interplay between myth and science reveals something crucial about human nature. We do not cling to Lemuria because we believe in its maps. We cling to it because it gives shape to absence. It is a way of naming everything history has lost: drowned cities, erased languages, silenced voices. Even if Lemuria never existed as a geological continent, it exists as an emotional one, a continent of memory and longing. Myths survive because they answer needs that facts alone cannot satisfy. Science tells us what happened. Myth tells us what it felt like. In that feeling lies a truth as deep as any fossil or zircon. Philosophically, Lemuria has become a metaphor for the unconscious. Just as oceans conceal continents, so too does the mind conceal memories. Psychologists have often compared forgotten trauma to submerged land, buried but not erased, waiting to resurface in dreams and fragments. Lemuria, then, can be seen as a symbol of all that lies beneath consciousness, the drowned histories of the psyche. It is both outer and inner, both the geography of oceans and the geography of memory. To contemplate it is to acknowledge that forgetting is never complete, that what is lost continues to shape us from beneath the surface. Culturally, the lost continent has become a stage for identity. In South India, it affirms antiquity. In esoteric traditions, it becomes the homeland of luminous beings. In popular culture, it is imagined as a cradle of prehistoric wisdom, a rival to Atlantis. Each version may differ, but all are united by the same core: the conviction that history is incomplete, that something vast has been erased, that absence itself demands recognition. Lemuria is the embodiment of this conviction, a name for everything beyond the edges of the known. The persistence of Lemuria also reminds us that silence itself has power. What cannot be proven cannot be disproven either, and in that ambiguity lies endurance. The ocean's silence keeps the myth alive. Each wave conceals as much as it reveals. Each horizon whispers of what lies beyond sight. The refusal of the sea to disclose its secrets ensures that Lemuria remains with us, not as certainty, but as possibility. It thrives in the tension between doubt and belief, between geology and poetry, between silence and memory. To stand at the edge of the Indian Ocean, gazing at the restless horizon, is to feel that tension. The waves carry both trade and silence, both life and absence. Beneath them may lie only stone, or ruins buried under silt, or nothing at all. Yet the very act of not knowing becomes its own form of presence. Lemuria endures not in proof, but in imagination. Not on maps, but in the human heart. It is the geography of what has been erased, the mythology of silence, the memory of grief that refuses to fade. Whether or not it ever existed in stone and soil, it exists in us as a reminder that the past is larger than history, that the ocean conceals more than it reveals, and that absence itself can be as powerful as presence. By the time the 20th century moved into its second half, Lemuria had firmly slipped the boundaries of science and entered the realm of cultural mythos. It no longer required the language of zoology or plate tectonics to survive. Instead, it thrived as a symbol of hidden histories, of drowned worlds that both science and memory struggled to retrieve. What gave Lemuria its peculiar staying power was the way it fused so many threads: fragments of folklore, geological hints, esoteric visions, and the universal human fear of forgetting. Each thread on its own might fray, but woven together they formed a tapestry that could not easily be erased. The Indian Ocean remained its anchor, not only for its geography, but for its haunting role as a theater of erasure. Unlike the Mediterranean, whose ruins rest close to the surface, the Indian Ocean conceals its secrets under layers of sediment, its seabed vast and largely unmapped. Within that silence, Lemuria became more than a hypothesis. It became a question mark hanging over the waters. Modern surveys reveal ancient volcanic ridges, fragments of Gondwana, drowned plateaus like the Mascarene and Kerguelen, and zircons that predate humanity by billions of years. These discoveries, while firmly geological, keep alive the unsettling truth that continents themselves are not eternal. If whole fragments of crust can vanish, then so too can the traces of the civilizations built upon their edges. Lemuria lives in that uncertainty, in the space where the Earth's violence overlaps with cultural memory. For Tamil culture, the myth of Kumari Kandam grew into something inseparable from identity. The Sangam poems remained, saturated with loss, their imagery of drowned lands and vanished dynasties refusing to fade. In the decades after independence, Tamil intellectuals reshaped these verses into a declaration of cultural antiquity, claiming that their history stretched into ages erased from mainstream narratives. By merging Kumari Kandam with Lemuria, they transformed a European scientific speculation into a symbol of Tamil pride. It was not merely about geography, but about survival, proof that cultural memory could endure even when empires dismissed it as fable. In this way, Lemuria was reborn not only as a lost continent, but as a weapon of resistance, a counter-history against the imposed silences of colonialism. Elsewhere, Lemuria continued to mutate into stranger forms. New Age circles in the West embraced it as a spiritual homeland, a place where ancient beings guarded wisdom hidden from modernity. Some imagined crystal cities beneath the sea, shimmering temples of forgotten light. Others claimed that survivors had migrated into subterranean sanctuaries beneath mountains, carrying their knowledge in secret. Mount Shasta, in California, became a focal point of such stories, where mystics spoke of luminous Lemurians who walked unseen among forests and snow. To skeptics, these were inventions. Yet the very extravagance of such tales reveals something deeper. Lemuria had become a canvas onto which the human imagination could project its deepest longings for continuity, for wisdom, for a world unbroken by erasure. At the same time, archaeology added fuel to the fire. In places like the Gulf of Cambay, sonar surveys revealed shapes that seemed too regular to be natural. Off the coast of Pumpuhar, divers glimpsed structures that resembled walls and steps, now drowned by the tide. Mainstream scholars urged caution, warning that natural formations can mimic architecture. Yet the images, however ambiguous, stirred something primal. They forced us to wonder whether beneath the silt might lie fragments of real cities, erased by rising seas thousands of years ago. Even without certainty, such possibilities bring Lemuria back to life, not as proof, but as presence. A reminder that the ocean's silence is never empty. Flood myths remain the strongest testimony, scattered across continents but resonating with shared imagery. From Mesopotamia's epic of Utnapishtim to South Asia's tale of Manu, warned by a divine fish, from Polynesia's Haiva to Aboriginal accounts of drowned coastlines, the same story recurs: waters rising, lands vanishing, people displaced. These stories may differ in detail, but they converge in their recognition of the ocean's power to erase. Science interprets them as cultural memories of post-Ice Age flooding, yet myth encodes them as symbols of divine judgment or cosmic cycles. Lemuria gathers these voices together, a name that unites countless laments into a single echo. It is not just one lost continent, but all lost homelands, remembered through grief and imagination. Philosophers and poets, too, found in Lemuria a metaphor for the hidden. Just as oceans conceal drowned continents, so the mind conceals forgotten histories. The unconscious becomes its own Lemuria, a landscape of memory buried beneath awareness, surfacing only in dreams or fragments. To speak of Lemuria, then, is to speak not only of geology, but of psychology, not only of myth, but of the fragile architectures of human memory. This symbolic resonance explains why the myth endures even where science has closed its doors. Lemuria is not a hypothesis to be proven or disproven. It is a language for what resists proof, for the persistence of the unseen. In popular culture, the lost continent continued to spread, appearing in novels, films, and speculative histories. Sometimes it was portrayed as a rival to Atlantis, sometimes as its precursor, sometimes as a parallel. Each version reimagined its geography, placing it not only in the Indian Ocean, but in the Pacific, the South Seas, even Antarctica. The name Lemuria became less about location and more about function. It was the shorthand for any vanished world, any drowned memory. The details shifted endlessly, but the core remained. The conviction that our story is incomplete, that history hides more than it reveals. Perhaps this is why Lemuria still matters today. It embodies the tension between presence and absence, knowledge and forgetting. It is the geography of silence, the mythology of loss, the psychology of buried memory. To imagine Lemuria is to confront the fragility of civilization, the incompleteness of history, the inevitability of erasure. Yet it is also to affirm resilience, for myths themselves are forms of survival. Even when lands drown, even when voices are silenced, memory finds ways to persist. In poetry, in folklore, in symbols whispered across time. Lemuria endures because it embodies that persistence. Standing at the shore of the Indian Ocean, watching the horizon dissolve into mist, one feels that weight. Beneath the waters may lie only volcanic ridges and ancient crust, or perhaps ruins buried under silt. The ocean doesn't say. It holds its silence, and in that silence Lemuria waits, not as proof, but as question, not as certainty, but as presence. It is the shadow of history, the echo of memory, the name we give to everything that has been erased yet refuses to disappear. And perhaps that is its true reality, not beneath the waves but within us, in the human need to name absence, to give shape to silence, to imagine continuity even when the world itself has broken apart. By the dawn of the 21st century, Lemuria had ceased to be a scientific theory and had fully transformed into a myth that speaks more about human longing than about geology. It became a continent that exists less on the ocean floor than in the imagination, stitched together from fragments of folklore, shards of poetry, anomalies in sonar maps, and the ache of collective memory. In this form, Lemuria endures not because it offers certainty, but because it refuses to resolve into either truth or falsehood. It is the unfinished story of the sea, always suggesting more than it reveals. The Indian Ocean continues to be the stage on which this myth unfolds. Its waters, bordered by some of the oldest civilizations, still conceal most of their depths beneath layers of sediment. Less than half its seabed has been carefully mapped, leaving vast stretches that remain only partially glimpsed. In such a space of obscurity, Lemuria thrives. Science may dismiss the 19th century model of a vanished land bridge, but the ocean's silence makes dismissal incomplete. There is always the possibility that something lies beneath, hidden by silt and distance. Every fragment dredged from the seabed, a zircon older than mountains, a granite shard where only volcanic stone should be, becomes a reminder that the world is less stable than we believe. Continents fracture, seas rise, and with them, whole histories may vanish. For cultures living along these shores, such vanishing was not an abstract theory, but lived experience. In Tamil tradition, the story of Kumari Kandam still carries the voice of ancestral grief, with Sangam poetry preserving the memory of floods that erased fertile kingdoms. These poems endure not because they prove geography, but because they express trauma. To merge them with the name Lemuria was to reclaim dignity, to refuse the erasure imposed by colonial scholars who dismissed them as allegory. Here, the lost continent became a symbol of survival against historical silence. Similar echoes resound in other parts of the world. Polynesian traditions recall Hiva, an ancestral homeland drowned by waves. Aboriginal Australians remember coasts that geology confirms were submerged thousands of years ago. In Madagascar, oral histories speak of migrations across waters, preserving fragments of movement and displacement. These stories may not align with one another in detail, but they share a common rhythm. The ocean as destroyer, as thief of worlds. Lemuria, though imagined in Victorian England, became a name under which all of these laments could gather, a way of naming what so many cultures remembered in fragments. The myth also grew through the lens of esotericism and popular imagination. Theosophy, already fertile ground for cosmic narratives, placed Lemuria within a cycle of human evolution, its downfall seen as a spiritual warning. Later, New Age traditions expanded the myth further, envisioning crystal cities beneath the sea or survivors retreating into subterranean sanctuaries. In California, Mount Shasta became associated with Lemurian legends, a place where seekers claimed to encounter luminous beings from the lost world. These stories, detached from geography, reveal how Lemuria had become not a continent, but a canvas, a surface upon which the imagination painted its deepest longings for origins, wisdom, and hidden continuities. And yet, archaeology occasionally complicates the dismissal of these myths. Off the coast of Pumpuhar, divers reported structures resembling steps and walls. In the Gulf of Cambay, sonar scans revealed formations interpreted by some as submerged cities. Skeptics caution that natural formations can mimic human design, but even the possibility keeps the myth alive. The sea's refusal to fully reveal its contents ensures that Lemuria remains suspended between doubt and hope, neither disproven nor confirmed. It is precisely this ambiguity that gives it power. Flood myths around the world reinforce the sense that Lemuria is not merely an invention, but a symbol for a deeper truth. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the biblical flood, the tale of Manu guided by a divine fish, and countless Polynesian and African traditions all tell of waters rising to erase lands and lives. These are not identical accounts, but they converge on the same recognition. The sea has always had the power to destroy, and people have always carried that destruction forward in story. Lemuria is the composite shadow of these myths, a name given to a universal grief that spans continents and millennia. Philosophers and poets have increasingly read Lemuria as metaphor. Just as the ocean conceals drowned continents, so the human psyche conceals forgotten histories. Memory, like geography, is fragile, easily submerged. To speak of Lemuria is to speak of what lies beneath awareness, of the unconscious depths that shape us without being visible. It becomes both a story about oceans and a story about ourselves, a reminder that forgetting does not erase but only buries, and that what is buried continues to exert its pull. In literature and media, Lemuria often appears as a counterpart to Atlantis. Where Atlantis symbolizes arrogance punished, Lemuria symbolizes silence, history lost not through hubris, but through erasure. In novels, films, and speculative histories, it is imagined variously as a cradle of wisdom, a rival empire, or a prehistoric Eden. Its details shift endlessly, but its essence remains constant. The haunting awareness that something vast has been forgotten. That awareness resonates across cultures because it reflects the human condition itself. We live surrounded by silences, our lives built upon fragments, our histories stitched from what survives while much more is erased. Perhaps this is why Lemuria has endured even into an age of satellites and deep-sea probes. It embodies both the fear and the hope that the world is stranger than we know. It suggests that the sea, which covers most of our planet, is not only a physical presence but also a psychological one, a symbol of mystery, concealment, and the persistence of absence. To speak of Lemuria is to name that mystery, to give shape to what is otherwise unspoken. It is less about the existence of a continent than about the recognition that history is incomplete, that memory is fragile, and that absence, too, is a kind of presence. Standing at the shore of the Indian Ocean today, the myth still lingers. The waves carry trade and silence, fish and memory, presence and absence. Beneath them may lie nothing but volcanic ridges and sediments, or perhaps ruins long buried. The ocean does not disclose. It holds its silence, and in that silence Lemuria persists, not as proof, but as question, not as geography, but as memory, not as certainty, but as shadow. It is the name we give to everything erased, yet not forgotten, everything drowned, yet still echoing. It is less a continent than a reminder that the sea has always been both cradle and grave, both beginning and erasure. And perhaps this is the essence of Lemuria's endurance, that it forces us to live with the unknown. It does not offer answers, but asks us to accept mystery as part of our inheritance. The ocean will continue to conceal. History will continue to fracture. Memory will continue to fade. And yet the myth of Lemuria will remain. An invitation to wonder, a recognition of absence, a reminder that the silence of the sea is as much a story as any ruins uncovered in stone. The myth of Lemuria endures not because it can be proven, but because it touches something fundamental in the human relationship with the unknown. It speaks to the fragility of memory, the inevitability of erasure, and the haunting sense that the past is larger than the record we inherit. By the 21st century, Lemuria had ceased to be even a contested scientific theory. It had become instead a symbol woven through literature, mysticism, and cultural memory, a continent not on maps but in imagination. Yet even as its scientific basis faded, its symbolic presence grew stronger, becoming a way to think about the silences of history and the mysteries of the ocean alike. The Indian Ocean remains at the heart of this mythology, a body of water both nurturing and devouring. Its shores gave rise to some of the earliest civilizations, from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, yet its depths conceal stories that have never surfaced. Submerged ridges and plateaus, scars of tectonic upheaval, suggest that the land beneath the waves has been anything but stable. Scientists now know that fragments like Mauritia, buried beneath volcanic flows, once stood above water before vanishing into the abyss. While these remnants belong to ages long before humanity, they reinforce the unsettling truth that even continents are impermanent. If entire land masses can sink, then what of the fragile cultures that flourished upon their margins? Lemuria persists in this gap between geological fact and cultural imagination, in the recognition that the ocean erases, but memory resists. Cultural traditions give flesh to this resistance. Tamil poetry continues to recall Kumari Kandam, a fertile kingdom consumed by floodwaters, its rulers and poets remembered only through verse. These laments, centuries old, are not simple allegories, but expressions of grief passed across generations. They are testimonies that memory can outlast geography, that what is drowned physically may survive in story. Linking Kumari Kandam with Lemuria became more than speculation. It became a way of asserting that history cannot be dictated solely by colonial or scientific narratives. Here, the lost continent became an assertion of pride, a reminder that cultural identity stretches beyond the borders of written history. Similar echoes surface around the globe. In Polynesia, the story of Haiva tells of an ancestral homeland lost to the sea, its people scattered across distant islands. Aboriginal Australians preserve oral traditions of coastlines that geology confirms were submerged thousands of years ago. Along the shores of East Africa, legends speak of storms that swallowed entire villages. These narratives, scattered yet resonant, all describe the same reality. The sea is not merely a boundary, but an eraser. Lemuria, though imagined in a European scientific context, has come to symbolize this universal recognition. It is the name given to the grief of all lost lands, to the memory that refuses to die even when the land itself has been erased. At the same time, esoteric traditions layered Lemuria with cosmic and spiritual significance. Theosophy placed it at the dawn of humanity, a cradle of a root race that fell into corruption and was destroyed. Later, New Age thinkers expanded these visions, imagining crystal temples beneath the waves, or survivors retreating into mountains to safeguard their wisdom. Mount Shasta, in California, became a modern sanctuary for Lemurian myths, where seekers claimed to sense the presence of beings from the lost world. While such tales have little in common with geology, they reveal how Lemuria had become a mirror for human longing, for wisdom, for continuity, for hidden origins unacknowledged by official history. Archaeology added its own complications. Sonar scans in the Gulf of Cambay revealed shapes that some interpreted as drowned cities, while divers off the coast of Pumpuhar reported structures resembling walls and steps. Mainstream scholars urged caution, pointing to natural formations and the dangers of overinterpretation. Yet the allure of these anomalies could not be dismissed. Each suggested that beneath the silt might lie traces of lives once lived, echoes of settlements erased by rising seas. Even if these sites do not confirm Lemuria, they embody its essence, the recognition that oceans conceal more than they reveal, that silence is as much a part of history as memory. Flood myths provide the deepest resonance. From the biblical tale of Noah to Mesopotamia's Utnapishtim, from the Indian story of Manu guided by a divine fish to countless Polynesian and African traditions, the same story repeats. Waters rising, lands vanishing, survival balanced on the edge of erasure. These stories differ in detail but converge in truth. They testify that humanity has lived with the trauma of floods for millennia, and that memory of those traumas has been carried forward in myth. Lemuria is the composite shadow of these stories, a name for the grief of all drowned homelands. Philosophers and poets interpret Lemuria as more than myth. It becomes metaphor. Just as oceans conceal continents, the unconscious conceals memory. Forgotten histories, silenced voices, and buried traumas lie beneath awareness as surely as ruins lie beneath waves. To contemplate Lemuria is to contemplate the fragility of memory itself, the persistence of what has been lost. It becomes not only a story about oceans, but a story about ourselves, a recognition that absence shapes us as much as presence. In literature and popular culture, Lemuria often appears alongside Atlantis as one of the great archetypes of loss. But while Atlantis represents arrogance punished, Lemuria represents silence. It is not the story of hubris, but of erasure, of lands that vanished without leaving monuments, of histories remembered only as fragments. In this way, Lemuria speaks to something universal, the haunting awareness that what we know is only part of the story, that the rest lies beyond recall. Perhaps that is why Lemuria still matters. It reminds us that the record of history is incomplete, that oceans conceal chapters we may never read, that civilizations can vanish without leaving more than a shadow in poetry or a pattern in sonar maps. It is less about certainty than about humility, less about proving a lost continent than about accepting the vastness of what is unknown. To stand on the shores of the Indian Ocean today is to feel this presence. The horizon stretches endlessly, the waves repeat their eternal rhythm, and beneath them lies silence. Whether it conceals nothing but volcanic ridges or the ruins of forgotten settlements, the effect is the same. A reminder that absence is part of the world, that history itself is haunted by what it cannot hold. Lemuria endures because it names that absence, giving shape to silence, giving memory to loss. And so Lemuria remains, not on maps but in the human heart, not as fact but as echo. It is the continent of erasure, the homeland of memory, the geography of grief. It does not need to exist physically to matter, because it already exists as a presence within us. The ocean conceals, but imagination reveals, and in that revelation Lemuria lives on, a shadow reminding us that the past is always larger, deeper, and more mysterious than we can ever know. By the 21st century, Lemuria had become a ghost woven into many different fabrics of thought. Scientific speculation long abandoned, cultural memory carried with grief, esoteric myth shimmering with mystical imagery, and literary metaphor that turned absence into presence. Each perspective overlaps, leaving the continent not as a singular idea, but as a constellation of meanings. What makes Lemuria endure is not its ability to withstand scientific scrutiny, but its ability to absorb silence, to embody what is missing, to give voice to what cannot be proven, but refuses to vanish. The ocean itself plays the most crucial role in sustaining the myth. The Indian Ocean, vast and largely unmapped in its deeper regions, has always been a threshold between worlds. It was the medium of ancient trade routes, carrying cinnamon, pearls, silk, and gold across its waves, binding together Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia. Yet while it connected cultures above the surface, below it remained a realm of silence, its floor covered by sediments that conceal more than they reveal. Sonar surveys uncover anomalies, ridges, and plateaus that suggest dramatic geological histories. Among these are the scars of Gondwana's breakup, fragments like the granitic islands of the Seychelles, or the submerged Mauritia, a microcontinent hidden beneath volcanic layers. Though far older than humanity, these reminders of erased landscapes blur the line between myth and geology. If land itself can disappear, why not also the memory of civilizations too fragile to endure? Cultural traditions insist upon this fragility. The Tamil legends of Kumari Kandam continue to hold meaning not as cartographic evidence, but as poetic testimony. The Sangam verses mourn rivers now lost, dynasties erased by floods, poets displaced from their homelands. These poems carry the tone of memory, not invention. To dismiss them is to overlook how trauma can persist through story. Merging Kumari Kandam with Lemuria allowed Tamil intellectuals to resist the erasure of colonial historiography, to claim that their culture reached into epochs deeper than outsiders allowed. In this way, Lemuria became not a geographical entity, but a cultural shield, a symbol of memory's survival even when geography is denied. Other traditions across the world echo this grief. Polynesia remembers Hiva, a drowned homeland that sent its people scattering across islands. Aboriginal Australians preserve oral histories of coasts swallowed by rising seas, accounts now validated by geological studies that trace sea level rise thousands of years ago. Along the East African littoral, folklore still speaks of villages claimed by sudden storms. These diverse traditions, distant from one another, converge on the same recognition. The ocean has taken more than it has given, and memory responds by refusing to let the losses vanish. Lemuria becomes the symbolic gathering point for these voices, a name given to grief carried across continents. Esotericism transformed Lemuria into something more than memory. Theosophical writers of the 19th and 20th centuries saw it as the cradle of a root race, a vast prehistoric civilization erased by cataclysm. New Age visions imagined luminous beings, crystal temples, and hidden sanctuaries beneath mountains like Shasta. These interpretations have little in common with geology, yet they reveal why Lemuria thrives. It provides a stage upon which to project human longing for wisdom beyond reach, for a continuity deeper than archaeology allows. Whether envisioned as a spiritual homeland or a lost utopia, Lemuria became a mirror for desire, reflecting the hope that something survives beneath the surface of erasure. Science itself, though it rejects Lemuria in its original form, has unintentionally fueled its endurance. Archaeologists continue to discover submerged settlements worldwide: Doggerland beneath the North Sea, ruins under the Black Sea, drowned villages along the coasts of Japan and India. These sites confirm that human history is not confined to what remains on dry land. When seas rose at the end of the Ice Age, countless communities disappeared, their memory surviving only in myth. The possibility of similar ruins lying beneath the Indian Ocean is not fantasy, but inevitability, awaiting only discovery. Each anomaly detected by sonar, each structure glimpsed by divers, is enough to stir the imagination back toward Lemuria, even if the name itself belongs to myth. Flood myths amplify this imagination. From the biblical story of Noah to Mesopotamia's Utnapishtim, from South Asia's Manu to countless Pacific tales, humanity has carried forward the memory of waters rising. These myths are not identical, but their universality suggests that they preserve deep cultural memories of catastrophe. Lemuria, though not explicitly named in any ancient text, becomes the synthesis of these stories. a symbolic continent standing for every drowned homeland, every erased memory, every civilization swallowed by tides. Philosophy reads Lemuria as a metaphor for the unconscious. Just as oceans conceal land, the mind conceals memory. Traumas, silenced voices, forgotten languages, and erased histories lie beneath awareness, shaping us in ways unseen. To speak of Lemuria is to speak of those hidden layers, of what is buried but not gone. It is both an external myth and an internal truth, both the geography of oceans and the geography of the psyche. In this light, Lemuria becomes indispensable, a language for the unseen forces that shape both culture and self. Literature and art keep the continent alive in another way. Novels, films, and speculative histories continue to reinvent it, sometimes as Atlantis's counterpart, sometimes as its precursor, sometimes as a cradle of wisdom or a utopia destroyed by its own hubris. The details shift endlessly, but the essence remains. Lemuria is the archetype of erasure. Where Atlantis teaches a moral lesson, Lemuria embodies silence itself, the silence of drowned lands, of broken histories, of memory that endures only as shadow. This distinction explains why it continues to captivate. It does not preach but haunts. In the end, Lemuria matters less as a continent than as a presence. It is the recognition that the past is incomplete, that oceans conceal more than they reveal, that civilizations can vanish without leaving more than a trace in poetry or folklore. It is not about certainty, but about humility, about accepting that what we know is provisional, stitched from fragments while vast silences remain. Lemuria persists because it reminds us of those silences, because it refuses to let us believe that history is whole. To stand by the Indian Ocean today is to feel its presence. The horizon stretches, waves repeat their rhythm, and beneath them lies a vastness we cannot fully chart. Perhaps only volcanic ridges and ancient crust lie there. Perhaps forgotten settlements rest buried in silt. The ocean does not answer. Its silence is its power, and in that silence Lemuria lives, not as proof, but as question, not as certainty, but as shadow. It is the geography of what is erased, the mythology of absence, the echo of memory that refuses to die. Thus, Lemuria endures, not because it can be mapped, but because it names the unnameable, gives form to silence, and keeps alive the recognition that what is lost continues to shape what survives. It is less a continent beneath the ocean than a continent within us, a reminder that absence, too, is part of the human inheritance, as real and as powerful as presence. By the early years of the 21st century, Lemuria had become a ghost woven through multiple registers of human thought. It is not merely a lost continent in a scientific sense, nor solely an esoteric paradise described by mystics, nor only the lament of cultures remembering drowned homelands. It is all of these at once. Its resilience comes from its capacity to inhabit many layers: geology, folklore, myth, philosophy, and politics. Each layer refracts the others, and together they create a presence that refuses to vanish. Lemuria is less about what lies beneath the Indian Ocean than about the human need to give form to absence, to name what has been erased but not forgotten. The ocean itself guarantees the endurance of the myth. The Indian Ocean covers vast territories that remain unmapped in detail, its sediment burying possible traces of vanished coastlines or forgotten settlements. Science has proven that microcontinents such as Mauritia, now hidden beneath basalt flows, once rose above the waves before sinking. While these lands predate humanity by millions of years, they confirm the principle that continents are not permanent. If entire fragments of Earth can disappear, then why not the memories of cultures who lived at their edges? This simple recognition fuels the imagination. Lemuria, whatever else it may be, expresses the unease that the ocean conceals more than it reveals, that history is not written only in ruins, but also in silence. Tamil memory insists upon this silence as something lived and inherited. The Sangam literature continues to mourn the loss of fertile lands, rulers, and poets displaced by floods. To hear these verses is to sense grief too vivid to be purely allegorical. Colonial scholarship once dismissed them as invention, but their endurance suggests something deeper, a cultural memory of trauma carried forward as poetry. When Tamil intellectuals merged these verses with Lemuria, they transformed a European hypothesis into a declaration of identity, asserting that their history stretched into depths ignored by colonial narratives. For them, Lemuria was not simply a myth. It was proof that memory itself resists erasure. This insistence is echoed across the globe. In Polynesia, stories of Haiva recall an ancestral homeland lost to the sea. Aboriginal Australians tell of drowned coastlines that geological research has confirmed were real. In East Africa, legends of villages erased by storms survive in oral traditions. Madagascar's oral histories preserve movements across the sea that still puzzle historians. These fragments converge like distant stars forming a constellation, each unique, yet together pointing to the same reality. The sea has always been capable of destroying worlds, and cultures have always responded with stories that outlast geography. Lemuria is the name we give to that constellation of grief. Meanwhile, in esoteric circles, Lemuria continued to shimmer with mystical significance. Theosophists described it as the cradle of a root race, while New Age traditions populated it with radiant beings and crystal temples. In California, Mount Shasta became associated with Lemurian survivors, imagined as luminous figures living within the mountain's depths. These stories, dismissed by science, nevertheless reveal why Lemuria persists. It provides a blank canvas upon which to project human longing, for hidden wisdom, for unbroken continuity, for the assurance that nothing truly disappears. The myth grows not weaker, but stronger in the absence of proof, because absence itself invites imagination. Yet archaeology ensures that the myth is never wholly detached from material possibility. Sonar surveys in the Gulf of Cambay revealed anomalies interpreted by some as drowned cities. Off Pumpuhar, divers reported seeing structures resembling steps or walls beneath the waves. Skeptics point to natural formations, but the allure of these discoveries cannot be denied. Even ambiguity sustains Lemuria, for each unanswered question deepens the sense that the ocean conceals histories waiting to be uncovered. In this way, Lemuria thrives not in certainty, but in the unresolved space where doubt and hope meet. Flood myths across civilizations reinforce this dynamic. The Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim surviving a world-destroying deluge. The Hebrew Bible recalls Noah's Ark. Indian tradition describes Manu guided by a divine fish. Polynesian legends recount islands erased by waves. Though details differ, the shared essence remains. Humanity remembers the sea not only as giver of life, but as destroyer of worlds. These myths, scattered across continents, feel less like invention than like collective memory of rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. Lemuria gathers these stories under a single name, becoming the symbolic homeland of all drowned civilizations, whether real or remembered. Philosophically, Lemuria has taken on a role as metaphor for the unconscious. Just as oceans conceal continents, so too does the human mind conceal memories, traumas, languages, and histories. What is forgotten does not vanish. It lingers beneath awareness, shaping thought in hidden ways. To contemplate Lemuria is to contemplate that hiddenness. It becomes a geography of the psyche, a reminder that forgetting is only another form of remembering, and that what is lost continues to act through absence. In this sense, Lemuria is as much inward as outward, a landscape both beneath the sea and beneath the mind. In literature and art, Lemuria continues to appear as Atlantis's quieter twin. Where Atlantis is often framed as a moral tale of hubris and downfall, Lemuria embodies silence, erasure without explanation, loss without monument. It is not punished arrogance, but inexplicable disappearance, which makes it more haunting. Writers, filmmakers, and artists return to it precisely because it does not resolve, because it lingers as an open question. Lemuria is less a story than a mood, less a legend than an atmosphere, the sense that history is broken, that something vast has been forgotten. And perhaps this is why Lemuria endures even now. In an age of satellites and deep-sea probes, it might seem that mystery has no place. Yet the ocean still covers most of our planet, its depths unexplored, its sediments concealing untold histories. Science maps fragments, but the larger picture remains hidden. Lemuria survives because it names that hiddenness. It is the recognition that knowledge is incomplete, that history is provisional, that the ocean's silence is not emptiness, but fullness. To stand on the shores of the Indian Ocean is to feel this presence. The horizon dissolves into haze, waves strike in their eternal rhythm, and beneath them lies silence. Perhaps only volcanic ridges rest there. Perhaps ruins of forgotten settlements wait under layers of silt. The ocean does not say. Its refusal to answer is its power, and in that refusal Lemuria speaks, not as certainty but as shadow, not as proof but as possibility. Thus, Lemuria persists as both myth and mirror. It reflects our fear of erasure, our longing for continuity, and our recognition that the world is deeper than we know. It is not a continent beneath the sea, but a continent within the human imagination, built of silence, grief, and wonder. And as long as oceans conceal and memory fractures, Lemuria will endure, whispering from the depths that absence too has its geography. As the myth of Lemuria continued its quiet passage into the 21st century, it no longer belonged to a single discourse. It had become a fluid symbol, flowing between cultures, absorbed into esoteric teachings, reflected in poetry, invoked in political rhetoric, and still whispered about in the margins of archaeology. Its staying power lies not in whether it ever existed as a continent, but in how it functions as a metaphor for the fragility of history itself. Lemuria represents the recognition that what we call the human story is not whole, that there are fractures and silences as vast as any ocean. The Indian Ocean, as always, remains the myth's silent witness. This great body of water holds not only routes of trade and migration, but also layers of erasure. Less explored than the Atlantic or the Pacific, its depths remain largely unmapped, its sediments concealing geological scars from continental drift and volcanic upheaval. Discoveries like Mauritia, a fragment of ancient crust buried beneath lava flows, remind us that continents themselves are impermanent. To geologists, these fragments belong to deep time, but to the imagination, they are confirmation that land can drown. Lemuria emerges in the space between scientific fact and imaginative yearning, where the possibility of loss becomes as haunting as its memory. Cultural traditions reinforce this haunting. The Tamil memory of Kumari Kandam, preserved in Sangam poetry, continues to echo with grief over vanished kingdoms. These verses do not read like idle invention. They pulse with sorrow and remembrance, as though entire generations carried the weight of catastrophe in their words. When merged with Lemuria, Kumari Kandam becomes not simply a lost homeland, but a cultural inheritance, a refusal to accept the erasures imposed by colonial narratives. For Tamils, the myth affirms antiquity and survival, placing their culture within an unbroken chain that reaches into prehistory. Far beyond India, similar memories stir. Polynesian traditions recall Hiva, a drowned ancestral homeland. Aboriginal Australians recount the loss of coastal lands that geological research now confirms as true. In East Africa, fishermen still tell of villages swept away by storms. These narratives, scattered and diverse, converge in their acknowledgement of the sea's dual role as giver and destroyer. Lemuria becomes a name for their shared memory, a symbolic continent uniting grief across oceans. The resonance lies not in geographical accuracy, but in the recognition that oceans carry away worlds, yet leave their echoes behind. Esoteric traditions seized upon this resonance and transformed Lemuria into a spiritual archetype. Theosophical teachings imagined it as the cradle of an ancient race, destroyed by corruption and cosmic upheaval. Later, New Age circles envisioned crystalline temples beneath the sea, or survivors who withdrew into hidden sanctuaries to safeguard their wisdom. California's Mount Shasta became a modern stage for these legends, a place where seekers claimed to encounter Lemurians in subterranean realms. However fantastical these accounts may seem, they show how Lemuria serves as a mirror for human longings, for origins unbroken by time, for wisdom older than memory, for continuity in a fractured world. Meanwhile, archaeology keeps the myth tethered to possibility. In the Gulf of Cambay, sonar scans revealed formations that some believed to be the remnants of drowned cities. Off Pumpuhar, divers reported structures resembling walls and steps. Mainstream scholars urged caution, warning against misinterpretation of natural patterns. Yet these anomalies, unresolved and silent, keep the imagination alive. They remind us that the sea conceals as much as it reveals, and that absence itself can provoke more questions than presence. Even if no Lemurian continent lies beneath the waves, the possibility of forgotten settlements lingers like a shadow. Flood myths across civilizations deepen this sense of shadow. From the Mesopotamian epic of Utnapishtim to the biblical tale of Noah, from the Indian story of Manu to Polynesian and African legends, waters rise again and again to erase the world. Each culture carries its own variation, but the core is shared. The ocean as destroyer, humanity surviving by memory. These myths may well encode cultural memories of post-Ice Age floods, proving that trauma can be carried across thousands of years. Lemuria, though absent from ancient texts, has become the composite symbol of these myths, a single name for humanity's universal confrontation with drowning and erasure. Philosophers and poets interpret Lemuria as a metaphor for the human mind itself. Just as the ocean conceals continents, the psyche conceals memory. Traumas, silenced voices, forgotten languages, these remain submerged, shaping us from beneath awareness. Lemuria becomes the geography of the unconscious, the lost continent of memory. It is not only about oceans, but about the silences that structure our inner worlds. To invoke Lemuria is to acknowledge that what has been forgotten continues to shape what is remembered, that the drowned past lives on as shadow. In literature and popular imagination, Lemuria has been paired with Atlantis as one of the archetypes of erasure. But unlike Atlantis, which often carries a moral tale of hubris punished, Lemuria speaks in whispers. It is not the story of arrogance destroyed, but of silence itself. Worlds vanishing without monument, remembered only in fragments of poetry or anomalies on sonar maps. This makes it more haunting than Atlantis. It embodies not the drama of downfall, but the quiet persistence of absence. Perhaps this is why Lemuria continues to matter. In a world of satellites and digital archives, we like to think that mystery is shrinking. Yet the ocean still covers most of the planet, and its deepest regions remain beyond our reach. History, too, remains fractured, filled with silences where entire cultures have been erased. Lemuria survives because it speaks to this condition. It names the recognition that knowledge is incomplete, that what we know is provisional, that silence itself has weight. To stand at the edge of the Indian Ocean is to feel this weight. The horizon stretches endlessly, the waves repeat their rhythm, and beneath them lies the unknown. Perhaps only volcanic ridges lie there, perhaps ruins buried under layers of silt remain. The ocean does not disclose. Its refusal to speak is precisely what sustains the myth. In its silence, we project memory, grief, and imagination. In its silence, Lemuria breathes. Thus, Lemuria remains, not as proof, but as presence, not as fact, but as question. It is the name we give to what history has lost, to the voices drowned by water, to the worlds erased yet still remembered in fragments of song. It endures because it gives form to absence, because it turns silence into story, because it insists that even what is erased is never truly gone. And so long as oceans conceal and memory falters, Lemuria will live on, as myth, as metaphor, and as the haunting geography of everything humanity cannot recover but refuses to forget. As the 21st century advanced, Lemuria remained suspended between silence and imagination, a myth whose endurance reveals more about humanity than about geology. Its power does not depend on proving a vanished continent. Rather, it depends on what it symbolizes: the persistence of absence, the resilience of memory, and the haunting sense that history is far larger than the fragments we inherit. Lemuria thrives precisely because it is unfinished, because it exists as a question that cannot be resolved, because it lingers in the shadows between what science measures and what culture remembers. The Indian Ocean continues to frame this myth as both cradle and grave. On its surface, it carries ships, trade, and migration, binding Africa, Arabia, India, and Southeast Asia into one of the world's most ancient networks. Beneath its surface, however, lie vast regions unmapped and silent, their sediments burying evidence of tectonic violence and drowned landscapes. Geological discoveries such as Mauritia remind us that continents are impermanent, capable of sinking beneath volcanic flows and leaving only fragments as evidence. Though these fragments belong to times before humanity, they reveal the principle that fuels the myth. If land can vanish, so too can the cultures that lived upon it. Lemuria becomes the name for that principle, the imagination's response to the ocean's silence. Cultural traditions confirm that silence is never empty. The Tamil memory of Kumari Kandam, preserved in Sangam literature, continues to reverberate through poetry that mourns lost rivers, displaced dynasties, and vanished lands. These verses do not sound like distant inventions. They sound like inherited grief, the memory of a trauma carried forward through language. When linked to Lemuria, Kumari Kandam became a symbol of pride and resistance, a reminder that history is not the monopoly of colonial narratives or scientific institutions. It was a way of saying that memory itself can be evidence that what is remembered in grief is no less real than what is excavated in ruins. This merging of myth and memory is echoed elsewhere. Polynesian traditions recall Hiva, a homeland drowned by waves. Aboriginal Australians tell of coastlines erased by rising seas, memories that modern geology has validated. In East Africa, tales of villages swallowed by storms remain part of oral tradition. These accounts are scattered across oceans, yet they converge on the same recognition. The sea erases. Lemuria gathers these stories under a single name, turning local griefs into a universal lament. It does not matter whether they describe the same landmass. What matters is that they describe the same condition, the fragility of civilizations before the endless patience of the sea. In esoteric traditions, Lemuria was transfigured into a spiritual archetype. Theosophy envisioned it as the birthplace of humanity's third root race, a civilization destroyed by its own decline. Later, New Age circles filled it with radiant beings, crystal temples, and hidden sanctuaries. Mount Shasta became a modern center for these myths, where seekers imagined Lemurian survivors living in secret beneath the mountain. However fantastical these accounts may be, they reveal the hunger that sustains the myth, the desire for continuity, for origins deeper than archaeology allows, for the assurance that wisdom is never fully lost. Lemuria is not only a continent in these traditions, it is a mirror of longing, reflecting humanity's refusal to accept erasure as final. Archaeology complicates this refusal. In the Gulf of Cambay, sonar scans revealed shapes interpreted by some as ancient cities buried under layers of silt. Off the coast of Pumpuhar, divers described structures that seemed like steps or walls, now drowned by tides. Mainstream scholars urge skepticism, warning against the dangers of seeing patterns where none exist. Yet these unresolved anomalies continue to breathe life into Lemuria. They remind us that the ocean's silence does not mean absence, that what lies buried may one day be revealed, that history is never fully closed. Even if these findings do not confirm Lemuria, they sustain the myth by keeping alive the possibility that forgotten settlements rest beneath the waves. Flood myths amplify this possibility, echoing across civilizations. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim survives a flood that erases the world. In Hebrew scripture, Noah preserves life from waters sent to cleanse the earth. In India, Manu is guided by a divine fish to safety. Polynesian stories recall islands drowned, and African traditions tell of storms that erased entire villages. These myths are not identical, but they share a core truth. Water destroys, memory resists. They may encode memories of post-Ice Age floods, when seas rose dramatically and erased entire coastlines. Lemuria becomes the archetype of these memories, the symbolic homeland of all that was drowned. Philosophy gives the myth another dimension. Just as oceans conceal continents, the psyche conceals memory. Forgotten traumas, silenced voices, erased languages, these remain hidden, shaping us from beneath awareness. Lemuria becomes the geography of the unconscious, the lost continent of memory. It is not only about oceans, but about the way forgetting never truly erases. In this metaphorical sense, Lemuria exists within everyone, a reminder that silence and absence shape identity as much as presence and knowledge. In literature and popular culture, Lemuria is often paired with Atlantis, but its voice is different. Atlantis is loud, a parable of hubris punished. Lemuria whispers. It does not dramatize arrogance but embodies erasure, worlds that vanished without monuments, remembered only in fragments and shadows. That quietness makes it haunting. Lemuria does not preach, it lingers. It is not a morality tale but an atmosphere, the sense that something vast has been forgotten and that the silence left behind is itself meaningful. This haunting is why Lemuria endures. In a world of satellites, sonar, and digital archives, one might think mystery has no place. Yet the ocean still covers most of the earth, its depths uncharted, its sediments hiding more than they reveal. History, too, remains fractured, filled with silences where entire cultures have disappeared without leaving more than a trace in poetry or myth. Lemuria survives because it names those silences. It does not need to be real in geography to be real in meaning. To stand at the edge of the Indian Ocean is to feel this meaning. The horizon stretches outward, waves crash with eternal rhythm, and beneath them lies silence. Perhaps only volcanic ridges and basalt flows remain, or perhaps forgotten settlements lie buried under silt. The ocean does not say. Its refusal is its power, and in that refusal Lemuria persists, not as certainty but as question, not as fact but as presence. Thus, Lemuria lives on as both myth and metaphor. It is the reminder that history is not whole, that memory is fragile, that oceans conceal more than they reveal. It is the geography of loss, the mythology of silence, the archaeology of absence. Whether or not it ever existed in stone and soil, it exists in us, shaping the way we imagine the past and understand the fragility of the present. Lemuria endures because it is not just about what was lost, but about the fact that loss itself is never complete. Lemuria lingers at the edge of imagination, not as a continent that science can confirm, but as a symbol of what history has lost and what memory refuses to surrender. By the time the 21st century unfolded, its presence had migrated almost entirely from maps into minds, from geology into myth. Yet this migration is not a diminishment. In some ways, Lemuria is more powerful as a myth than it ever was as a hypothesis. Freed from the constraints of science, it has become a mirror in which humanity reflects its deepest questions. What does it mean to lose? What does it mean to forget? And what remains of us when the record of our existence is swallowed by silence? The Indian Ocean, vast and inscrutable, continues to serve as the canvas for this reflection. Its surface is alive with trade routes and migrations that shaped civilizations, but its depths remain a reservoir of absence. Beneath layers of sediment lie scars of tectonic upheaval, ridges, trenches, and fragments of drowned land like Mauritia, whose zircons whisper of continents erased. Geologists speak of plate tectonics, of microcontinents consumed by magma, of slow processes stretching across millions of years. Yet even these explanations reinforce the central truth. Nothing is permanent. Continents themselves can disappear. And if stone can vanish, how much more fragile are the stories of those who once lived upon its edges? This fragility is where Lemuria finds its home. It is not just a tale of geology, but a vessel for cultural memory. Tamil tradition keeps alive the story of Kumari Kandam, described in Sangam poetry as fertile lands with flowing rivers and proud dynasties, now drowned beneath the sea. These verses pulse with grief, not fantasy. They suggest that memory can endure even when geography is gone, that the trauma of erasure becomes a song, passed across centuries. Linking Kumari Kandam with Lemuria was never only about proving geography. It was about resisting erasure, about asserting that memory has weight even when stone does not survive. Around the world, other traditions echo this resistance. Polynesian stories recall Hiva, a homeland lost to the ocean. Aboriginal Australians preserve memories of drowned coastlines that science has confirmed as real. East African lore tells of storms swallowing entire villages. These accounts do not align in detail, yet they harmonize in theme: the sea as destroyer, erasing worlds with indifferent tides. Lemuria becomes a symbolic gathering of these laments, a single name under which the voices of grief from many shores converge. It is not the continent itself that matters, but the recognition it represents. That the ocean has always been an eraser, and that memory has always struggled to endure against it. Esoteric traditions transformed Lemuria into a cosmic metaphor. Theosophists imagined it as the home of a prehistoric root race destroyed by decline. Later, New Age visions filled it with crystal temples and radiant beings, guardians of wisdom hidden from modern humanity. Mount Shasta became a stage for these myths, where seekers believed Lemurian survivors still dwelled in subterranean sanctuaries. These visions, fantastical as they may seem, reveal why Lemuria endures. It provides a mirror for longing, for origins unbroken by time, for wisdom untouched by erasure, for assurance that not everything is lost. Even when stripped of geology, Lemuria survives as a spiritual homeland. Archaeology adds another layer to the story, complicating dismissal. In the Gulf of Cambay, sonar scans revealed formations interpreted by some as submerged cities, though debate continues over whether they are natural. Off the coast of Pumpuhar, divers reported structures resembling walls and steps, now hidden by tides. Mainstream scholars remain cautious, but these anomalies sustain curiosity. They remind us that the ocean conceals more than it reveals, and that history may yet lie buried under silt. Even if no definitive evidence of Lemuria will ever surface, the possibility itself breathes life into the myth. Flood myths amplify that breath. From Mesopotamia's Utnapishtim to the biblical Noah, from Manu in India to Polynesian tales of islands drowned, cultures across the globe remember waters rising to erase the world. These myths may encode cultural memories of post-Ice Age floods, when seas rose dramatically and coastlines vanished. Lemuria, though absent from ancient texts, has become the symbolic homeland of these stories. It is the name for the drowned past that humanity carries as grief and memory, a shorthand for the recognition that water has always been both cradle and grave. Philosophers and poets read Lemuria as a metaphor for the unconscious. Just as oceans conceal continents, so minds conceal memory. Forgotten languages, erased voices, buried traumas, all lie beneath awareness, shaping us from below. To contemplate Lemuria is to confront that hiddenness, to realize that forgetting is never total, that what is lost continues to act through silence. In this sense, Lemuria exists not beneath the sea, but within us, a continent of the psyche as much as of geology. In literature and art, Lemuria remains Atlantis's quieter twin. Atlantis is loud, a parable of arrogance punished, Lemuria whispers. It embodies silence itself, the vanishing of worlds without monuments, remembered only in fragments of poetry or anomalies glimpsed by sonar. It does not dramatize downfall, it lingers as absence. That quietness is its power. Lemuria does not tell us what to believe. It reminds us of what cannot be known, of what remains outside the grasp of certainty. And perhaps this is why Lemuria still matters today. In an age of satellites and digital archives, mystery might seem diminished, but the ocean resists. Most of it remains unmapped, its sediments untouched, its depths beyond reach. History, too, remains fractured, with countless voices erased, countless civilizations forgotten. Lemuria endures because it names this condition. It is the recognition that history is provisional, that memory is fragile, that silence itself is part of the record. To stand on the shore of the Indian Ocean is to feel this truth. The horizon stretches outward, the waves repeat their endless rhythm, and beneath them lies a silence that will not be broken. Perhaps there are only ridges of basalt and volcanic scars, or perhaps there are ruins buried beneath the silt, fragments of forgotten lives. The ocean does not reveal. Its refusal is its mystery, and in that refusal Lemuria persists, not as continent but as presence, not as proof but as echo. Thus, Lemuria survives not because it is real in stone and soil, but because it is real in us. It is the geography of absence, the mythology of grief, the archaeology of silence. It is the name we give to what history has lost, but memory will not release. And as long as oceans conceal, as long as memory fractures, as long as humanity wonders at the silence beneath the waves, Lemuria will endure. Haunting the edge of knowledge, whispering from the deep, reminding us that loss itself is never complete.